I'm the captain now.
There we go. All right. Well, if my math is right, the all lost time is 107, 2.5 hours from right now.
Okay.
You guys begin.
All right. Without further ado, let's get started. Plaintiff, are you ready to go?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Defense, are you as well ready to go?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense is ready to proceed.
All right. We'll begin with preliminary matters. We'll begin with, of course, with the plaintiff. Go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Since we are in a virtual environment, we would like to ask the court's permission to remain seated with our camera angle set through the remainder of trial today.
Absolutely.
And we would like to go ahead and make introductions for our attorneys.
Please do.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Erica Daly, and I'm the plaintiff closing attorney in today's case.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Christian Mancino, the plaintiff opening attorney in today's case.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Hannah Trahan, and I'm the middle attorney for the plaintiff today.
And good morning to you, Ms. Trahan.
Your Honor, today we have chosen to pursue a claim of negligence per se against the defendant Peony Estates, and we would also like to draw the court's attention to the pretrial order.
Okay. Let me pull that up right now. I think I'm provided a copy of the exhibits in my email. So give me 1 second. Or maybe not. Just tell me about it. We'll go with that.
First, we would like to note that all evidence pertaining to the battery claim is solely for use if battery is pursued, and we are not pursuing battery today.
Gotcha. Okay.
And second, we would like to note that Peony Estates is vicariously liable for all individual actions of their employees, including Harper Martini and Austin Lewis.
Awesome. Gotcha.
And lastly, we would like to invoke Rules 603 and 615, the respective construction, swearing in, and sequestration of witnesses.
Okay, perfect. Glad you did it now.
And the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
All right, so let's turn it over to defense. So introductions and preliminary matters from you all.
Permission to make introductions before the court.
Absolutely.
My name is Ross Morrison. I'll be the middle attorney in today's case.
Okay.
I'm joined by my co-counselors, Shanna Kim, who will be the opening attorney.
And good morning, Ms. Campbell.
And my co-counselor, Madison Clubb, who will be the closing attorney.
Is it club or club?
Club, C-L-U-B-B.
Gotcha. Great. Want to make sure I got that right. Okay, cool.
And Your Honor, I would like to ask preferences about striking testimony from the record. Should we assume it's stricken?
So when it comes to just overall matters of sustained objection sustained, you'll have to request a motion to strike on that front just so we can have a situational awareness of that. There's a very limited exception in which I would keep testimony on the record barring an objection being sustained. It's a very minute part, but so it's likely it'll get stricken, but just ask permission.
Okay, and I'd like to draw the court's attention to stipulation 17,
Okay.
that a canister of bug-off pesticides was also found in the same dumpster in which the Rapid River Police found exhibits 2A and 2B.
Okay, that is awesome. And remind me of what exhibits 2A and 2B are. Actually,
The bottle of wine and its label.
Okay, cool.
And with that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Excellent. Plaintiff opener, Mr. Mancino, I believe. Please proceed with your statement.
Yes, Your Honor.
And I'm trusting timekeepers are ready to go.
Yes, Your Honor.
Great. Go ahead and begin.
May it please the court. Pesticides and profits. This is a case about a winery that valued profits above all else, including human life. You'll hear about a winery that tried to save money, but mishandled dangerous pesticides in the process. And it's this winery's pesticides that caused the death of a man on the night before his wedding. The winery was Peony Estates, and the man was Genesis Petrillo. It was the night before his wedding, the rehearsal dinner. All of his friends and family were there to share a life-changing day, and Genesis Petrillo sat there next to his beloved fiancée, Casey Soto. And the soon-to-be family celebrated. The bride's father, Harper Martini, gave a speech about the young couple's relationship, and he offered Genesis Petrillo a gift of a bottle of 2019 Cara wine. But this wasn't just any bottle. And not only was it the only 2019 Cara wine that existed, but it was made by Peony Estates, the same winery the wedding rehearsal was being held at. Peony Estates had grown the grapes and bottled the wine themselves. Throughout today's trial, pay attention to where this bottle was and listen to what happened to it. Genesis Petrillo drank this wine, but just a couple of hours later, something was wrong. Genesis Petrillo was really sick, his eyes were watery, and he was vomiting. He gets rushed to the ER, and after a few more hours, Genesis Petrillo is dead. After an autopsy, wine and pesticides are found in his stomach. My name is Christian Mancino, and I'm representing the estate of Genesis Petrillo. Today, we've brought a negligence per se claim against the defendant, Peony Estates. And there's 4 factors in a negligence per se claim, which must be proven by a preponderance of the evidence, simply more likely than not. The first factor we'll prove is that Peony Estates violated Midland Section 12-100, the health code relating to pests and pesticides. Second, that this statute is a safety statute. The defense already agreed to this factor. Third, we'll prove that Peony Estates caused a harm that same Midlands health code was intended to prevent. And lastly, that Genesis Petrillo was part of Midland Section 12-100's protected class. Again, the defense has already admitted to this factor. At the conclusion of today's trial, the judge will instruct you to determine if it's more likely than not that Peony Estates violated the health code statute and if their improper use of pesticides caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Today, you'll hear from 3 witnesses from the plaintiff. You'll first hear from Dr. Jim Kwan, the doctor who treated Genesis the night that he died. She'll tell you that wine and pesticides were found in Genesis Petrillo's stomach and how that pesticide is what killed Genesis Petrillo. Next, you'll hear from Riley Adkins O'Keefe, an FDA health inspector that went to Peony Estates multiple times and found numerous violations of Midland's code for dealing with pests and pesticides. She'll tell you exactly how Peony Estates violations could lead to pesticides being in the wine. And lastly, you'll hear from Casey Soto, Genesis Petrillo's fiance. She'll tell you about her personal observations of Peony Estates pesticide usage and how she was so concerned about this that she was considering changing her wedding venue location. At the conclusion of today's trial, once you've heard all the evidence, my co-counsel, Ms. Erica Daly, will come before you and ask that you find the defendant, Peony Estates, liable for Genesis Petrillo's death, because Peony Estates misused their pesticides, valued profits above all else, and the price of their actions was Genesis Petrillo's life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mancino. So we are going to turn it over to the defense, give my scoring judges and myself about just 20 seconds to make sure we've got everything written down. I can't speak for Andrew and Ed, but I always take like 20 seconds. So blame me for that. So. Okay, Ed, Andrew, you guys ready? Andrew's ready. I can't see Ed, but I don't really care what he's doing. So we'll go to the defense opening.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. There is a simpler explanation. Genesis Petrillo had a diseased liver and passed away from liver failure. Now, the defense cannot imagine the terrible things that Genesis Petrillo went through, and our hearts go out to his family and loved ones. But when the plaintiff today brings forth a negligence per se claim, they brought with them the sole burden of proof. To succeed on the negligence claim, they have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, that is to say, more likely than not, that Peony Estates handled its pesticides in a way that caused harm to Genesis Petrillo. They're not going to be able to meet that burden because, as you will see, members of the jury, the simplest explanation is more likely, and the simplest explanation is that Genesis Petrillo died of liver disease. The simplest explanation is not the only one you will hear today, though. As Mr. Mancino mentioned just a moment ago, the plaintiff wants you to infer that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning. to make that inference, they want you to jump through a series of inferential hoops about when pesticides got into the wine, how much pesticide got into the wine, and whether pesticides were actually Genesis petrilo's cause of death. Members of the jury, it is the plaintiff's job to connect these dots. As you'll see, the plaintiff will fail to do so. The plaintiff will fail to meet that burden. We humbly ask you today to keep 3 questions in mind as you listen to the evidence in today's case. We're confident that as you listen to the evidence that answers these questions, you'll discover that the best explanation is the simplest explanation. Genesis Petrillo died of liver failure. First, we'd like you to ask yourselves whether it's even possible that the wine Genesis Petrillo drank was contaminated with pesticide. None of the witnesses today will be able to take that stand and directly tell you how or when pesticides got into the wine. However, you will hear from the person responsible for wine production at Peony Estates, Austin Lewis. He'll recount how Peony Estates turned some grapes into the vineyard into the bottle of wine that Genesis Petrillo drank on June 7th. When he does, he will explain to you that at no point in the winemaking process did pesticide even get close enough to contaminate the wine. You will also hear how once the bottling was finished, the bottle remained sealed right up until Genesis Petrillo drank it. Second, we'd like you to consider if pesticides actually could have caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Now, the defense denies that there was ever any lethal dosage of pesticide in Peony Estates wine, but even if there was, it would not explain Genesis Petrillo's death. Austin Lewis will also describe to you today how an employee of Peony Estates ingested pesticide and how that experience differed wholly from Genesis Petrillo's. Third, we'd like you to consider what else could have caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Today, the defense will call Dr. Cannon to the stand. Now, Dr. Cannon is a medical expert, and she will describe to you how there are other ways that Genesis Petrillo could have died. In particular, she will discuss hepatic disease. Hepatic disease, as she will explain, is something that can be caused by a repeated substance abuse problem. Today, the Soto Petrillo wedding planner, Blair Osborne, will take the stand and explain to you how Genesis Petrillo's penchant for partying showed repeated instances of substance abuse, and how that Genesis Petrillo was drunk on the night of his death. Members of the jury, as you use the combination of the evidence to answer these 3 questions, you will find that the plaintiff has not met their burden. You'll see that the simplest, the best, and the only plausible explanation for Genesis Petrillo's death is liver failure, not pesticide poisoning. That's why, at the close of evidence, my co-counsel, Ms. Maddie Clubb, will come before you and ask you to find Peony Estates not liable.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Campbell. So we are going to turn it over to the plaintiff. Please go ahead and call your first witness. Judges, if you need a second, let me know. But in the meantime, plaintiff, please go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff now calls Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand.
Okay, Dr. Kwan, you understand you're under oath?
Yes.
Wonderful. Please proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwan, and I am a first responder in the ER.
What do you do in the ER?
I'm currently the chief of emergency physician at River Valley Hospital in Midlands. Normally, I have emergency patients come in and require immediately medical attention, regardless of their condition.
Dr. Kwan, can you tell us a little about your educational background?
I received my Bachelor's of Science at Georgia Tech and then went on to med school at UNC Chapel Hill. Finally, I completed my residency at Emory's Department of Emergency Medicine and Medical Toxicology.
Dr. Kwan, why are you here today?
I'm here today to give expert testimony on the death of Mr. Genesis Petrillo.
How did you begin your analysis for today's case?
I began my analysis by examining the following materials: the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, the toxicology and lab testing reports, the death certificate, an analytical report of Petrillo's wine bottle, and finally, the alcohol impairment chart.
Dr. Kwan, what method did you use in your analysis?
I conducted a full examination of the defendant in the emergency room and analyzed his symptoms and gave a diagnosis.
What does a normal examination entail?
Normally, when a patient comes into ER, it's very a quick, fast-paced environment. So what we do is check for initial symptoms and see what those relate to. From there, we make a diagnosis and we treat the patient.
Dr. Kwan, let's discuss the examination of the defendant, Genesis Petrillo. When did he first arrive in the emergency room?
Genesis Petrillo arrived at around 1 a.m. with his friend Angel Rodriguez.
And what were your initial thoughts when Mr. Petrillo was brought into the ER?
When I first entered the room to examine Mr. Petrillo, I took note of his vitals, his systems, and took samples of his vomit. At that point, he was vomiting occasionally and was not able to support himself. He also experienced muscle twitches and struggled to breathe, and I heard wheezing as I told him to take deep breaths. I attempted to speak to Mr. Petrillo, however, he was having trouble responding due to his symptoms. At that point, I suspected he could have had alcohol poisoning, but I did notice some other symptoms that did not align with alcohol poisoning.
What other symptoms do you mean?
So I noticed how Mr. Petrillo did have contracted pupils rather than dilated, which is not normal for alcohol poisoning. His eyes were also tearing excessively, and his heart rate was at a slow pace rather than weak and rapid. So this led me to test for other toxins in his system.
So what did you do with that test?
Well, since I had examined his eyes and noted the other different symptoms not consistent with alcohol poisoning, I decided to run a toxicology test because there's a chance Mr. Petrillo could have been exposed to pesticide poisoning.
Dr. Kwan, before we get into that test, how can someone be poisoned by a pesticide?
So there are 3 ways someone can receive organophosphate poisoning. It could be physical contact, inhalation, or ingestion. The typical symptoms for physical contact would be rashes. As for inhalation, respiratory failure and symptoms, and for indigestion, nervous system breakdown. There were no rashes or specific respiratory symptoms related to pesticide poisoning, so it only left me with the alternative of ingestion.
What were the results of the toxicology test that you ran?
After the testing results, I found Genesis Petrillo had ingested organophosphate poison, which is typically used in insecticide, which was found in the contents of his stomach.
Well, how did the pesticide enter Genesis Petrillo's system?
Well, since there were no rashes or respiratory symptoms in Mr. Petrillo, and because the only pesticide was found within his stomach, I decided that the pesticide was ingested rather than inhaled or transmitted through skin contact.
Dr. Kwan, what is your final conclusion in today's case?
So there is a slim chance that something else could have caused the poisoning, and once I had received the stomach content report, the clean food could only have been mixed with a poison wine. Therefore, by the end of all testing, I concluded that Genesis Petrillo had ingested contaminated wine with organophosphate pesticide on June 7th.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Give me 10 seconds and then we'll turn it over to Cross. Okay, so I'm ready for Cross. Ed, Andrew, you guys good? Andrew's good, or Ed's good. Andrew, you? Awesome. All right, so cross-examination of Dr. Kwan. Please go ahead.
Dr. Kwan, can you see and hear me clearly?
Yes.
You believe that Petrillo's cause of death was pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, I do.
Yet you don't even know how much pesticide was in Petrillo's bloodstream, do you?
No, because from what we had seen, it was only foundable traceably, and therefore we could not get a specific measure from
So
testing.
that's a yes, you don't know.
Yes.
And you treated Petrillo for pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, yes, I did.
Gave the antidote for pesticide poisoning.
Yes.
But the antidote did not work, did it?
By the time I did administer the antidote, it was quite late and Genesis Petrillo had fell into a coma.
So that's a yes, the antidote for pesticide poisoning did not work.
I cannot conclude that simply because Genesis Petrillo did not survive from the coma.
Did the antidote save Petrillo's life?
No.
Now, earlier you mentioned that when you first saw Petrillo, you thought Petrillo was suffering from alcohol poisoning, correct?
Yes, all of his symptoms did show for alcohol poisoning.
Petrillo was intoxicated.
Yes.
Yes. But then you started noticing other symptoms like involuntary muscle twitching and incontinence, right?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Kwan, as an expert in toxicology, you're familiar with hepatic disease, aren't you?
Yes, yes, I am.
So you know that things like involuntary muscle twitching and incontinence are consistent with hepatic disease.
Yes, they are. However, in order for me to rule out hepatic disease, there are also landmark symptoms such as yellowing of the skin, which Genesis Petrillo did not have, which is why I decided to rule out hepatic disease.
So that's a yes. Involuntary muscle twitching and incontinence are consistent with hepatic disease.
Yes, those symptoms are consistent.
Dr. Kwan, as an expert, you know how to write a report, correct?
Yes, of course.
And you write a full and complete report, correct?
Yes.
Yet nowhere in your report do you mention hepatic disease, something that shares nearly every single symptom as Genesis Petrillo displayed.
Yes, because again, there were certain symptoms that did not cross the list. I had to consider pesticide poisoning over hepatic disease.
So that's yes, nowhere in your report do you even mention hepatic disease.
No.
Now, earlier on direct, you mentioned, or you testified actually, that Petrillo displayed no respiratory symptoms. Is that true?
He was having bronchospasms, however, they did not receive as certain pesticide poisoning symptoms.
Well, bronchospasms are a respiratory symptom, aren't they?
Yes, however, they do not match pesticide poisoning symptoms.
And respiratory symptoms are also consistent with hepatic disease, aren't they?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Any redirect examination of this witness?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Dr. Kwan, why did you not consider hepatic disease?
Well, because again, there were landmark symptoms of hepatic disease that would have to have been in Genesis Petrillo, I decided that it was not correct to diagnose him with hepatic disease and decided to continue with pesticide poisoning.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
Okay, any recross examination based off that?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
I want to talk about those landmark symptoms you just mentioned. On direct, you said some of those landmark symptoms would be something like jaundice, correct?
Yes.
But as an expert in toxicology and someone familiar with hepatic disease, you would know that jaundice is a common symptom, but not a landmark symptom in every case.
Yes, but in terms of pesticide poisoning, no one would show symptoms of jaundice. Therefore, it would have to be pesticide poisoning. Hepatic disease would definitely have jaundice as a symptom.
Dr. Kwan, jaundice is a common symptom in hepatic disease, but it's not in every case.
Yes, it is common. However, also by going through testing results and whatnot, it was determined that Justice Petrillo had pesticide poisoning rather than hepatic disease.
Dr. Kwan, yes or no? Jaundice is common for hepatic disease, but not everyone shows it when they have it.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered. Dr. Kwan has answered this question multiple times.
I'm going to give her one more shot at it because there's been a little bit of elaboration. So I just want to see if the witness gives a clear yes or no. But if we go one more past this, please renew the objection.
So that's a yes or a no. Jaundice is common for hepatic disease, but not always present.
Yes, it is a typical.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, let me just allow the witness to go ahead and finish that answer. Go ahead, Dr. Kwan.
So for jaundice, it is a very typical symptom. However, as I was trying to say, Justice Petrillo did not show that. And within his toxicology and lab testing results, we see that there's low presence of acetylcholine, which is an effect of pesticide poisoning. And that has no correlation whatsoever to hepatic disease.
Okay, understood. So that is the end of that recross examination. And we are going to turn it over to the next direct. And thank you, Dr. Kwan. You are excused.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Riley O'Keefe to the stand.
Okay, wonderful. Mr. and Ms. O'Keefe, let's see. I believe it's Miss O'Keefe. Okay, Miss O'Keefe, you understand you are under oath.
I do.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, and please go ahead and proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, I'm Riley Atkins O'Keefe.
And why are you in court today?
Well, I'm actually not in court today, and thank God for that. Courtrooms are riddled with germs. I mean, imagine the contaminants. But I am testifying over Zoom today because I visited Peony Estates 4 times as an FDA health inspector.
What type of education does it take to become a health inspector?
I earned my master's in viticulture, the study of grapevines, and enology, the study of wines, from Midlands U in 2012.
What did you do with your education?
In 2013, I combined my love of wine and cleanliness by working as a health inspector for wineries. I was even promoted to senior health inspector in 2017.
And what do you do as a senior health inspector?
As senior health inspector, it's my job to find health and safety violations and make sure that wineries resolve them. If businesses violate health standards, it can cause people to get sick or even die. As an official designee for the FDA, it is no understatement to say I can save lives.
Well, how do you know what safety precautions are necessary?
Well, I don't make the rules. That's above my pay grade. I just make sure they're being followed. I look at the Midlands Building Code to know what is necessary to keep people safe.
And what kinds of things do you enforce through the Midlands Building Code?
Oh, it has all the regulations that people are used to seeing in restaurants. For example, the employees must wash hands sign. That's me from the code. You're welcome.
Well, what does the Midlands Building Code mention about pesticide usage in wineries?
Well, pesticides are only allowed in wineries if safety precautions are put in place to make sure the pesticides don't contaminate any food or wine and make people get sick.
I'd now like to talk about your visit to Peony Estates in 2018. Why were you visiting Peony Estates?
In 2018, my department got a letter claiming that Peony Estates was having a problem dealing with a bug infestation in their cellar and that the pesticides being used might be getting into the wine. So I was assigned to investigate that claim per protocol.
And what did you find during your visit?
Bugs just everywhere, all over the floor and wine barrels. It was disgusting. Based on my training and experience, the pests had been present for at least 4 to 8 weeks.
Would these pests have affected the wine in the nearby barrels?
Well, the bugs themselves could not have affected the wine inside the barrels. The Peony Estates pesticides could have poisoned the wine.
What did you do once you found out about Peony Estates' use of pesticides?
I ran a toxicology report from a sample of wine inside the barrels to check if pesticides were even present.
Why did you need to run a toxicology report?
The wine in these barrels would be bottled and sold in 2019. If there were unsafe amounts of pesticides just sitting in the wine, it would not be safe to drink.
Well, what did your toxicology report reveal?
It showed a high level of isofenfus, which is a chemical commonly found in pest control tools, like bug-off pesticides.
And what does it mean if there's a high level of isofenfus?
A high level of isofenfus just means that there is a high concentration of a pesticide chemical in the wine. A high level of pesticides in someone's drink can be extremely dangerous because drinking pesticides can be deadly.
When did you next inspect Peony Estates?
During May 2019, I visited Peony Estates for a follow-up inspection.
And what did you find on this visit?
Peony Estates had 4 health code violations in their bottling area. 3 of them were related to pesticides.
What was the first health code violation relating to pesticides?
There were 3 pesticide containers in the bottling facilities that were just too close to open wine bottles.
Why is this a violation of health code?
Peony Estates was not taking steps to prevent cross-contamination. Midland's code does require this, as pesticide containers can leak out harmful chemicals like isofenfus that can severely harm anyone who ingests it.
Would you explain Peony Estates' next health code violation?
When I spoke to the staff, I found that none of them knew about the importance of keeping pesticides away from wine processing areas.
How would an uninformed staff violate health codes?
Like staff that doesn't understand how unsafe it is to have pesticides around open wine containers will store pesticides closer to that wine.
And what was the final health code violation you observed at Peony Estates?
A bottle of 2019 Care wine was stored very close to a bottle of pesticides.
Where was this wine bottle?
It was sitting on a wooden shelf in the bottling area.
Where was the container of pesticides?
The pesticides were sitting on that same shelf on top, right near the wine bottle.
Was there anything in between the wine bottle and the pesticide can?
No, there was no sort of barrier or anything to protect the wine bottle from getting contaminated. The bottle of wine and the pesticides were sitting all by themselves, right near each other.
And why did this violate health code?
Well, it's possible that the pesticide chemicals got into this 2019 bottle of Care wine. Because of this, I told employees to discard the bottle because the wine could be contaminated.
Are you aware if Peony Estates followed your requirement to discard the 2019 Carroll wine bottle?
Well, they did not move it in front of me, but I did notice an identical 2019 Carroll bottle of wine sitting in the exact same spot later that month when I went for a follow-up visit. Martini said that this was a different bottle, but I was unable to verify this.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Explain.
Ms. Atkins O'Keefe has no knowledge whether or not that bottle of Carroll wine she saw on her second follow-up visit is the same one that she saw on her first.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and respond.
Yes, Your Honor. That's exactly what this witness is saying. She's saying that she doesn't know if it's the same bottle because she didn't see them move it. She is saying that, Mr. Martini said it was a different bottle, but that she's unable to verify it, Your Honor.
I agree with counsel. I think she's actually clarifying that she doesn't know that for a fact. She's just going off of what someone told her. So I don't think there's any speculative feature. I think she's actually saying she doesn't know. So I'm going to overrule the objection and please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Were you finished with your answer, Ms. O'Keefe?
Yes.
Now, what other actions did you take after finding these health code violations?
I placed Peony Estates on a 45-day probationary period, and then I conducted a surprise follow-up inspection later that month.
Why didn't you take any more serious actions against Peony Estates?
There wasn't anything else I could do at this point. I followed procedure and made immediate recommendations, like discarding the 2019 Care bottle of wine. These situations are difficult because as a health inspector, I can only make recommendations to prevent safety hazards. I can't force them to change anything unless they refuse to comply with my recommendations.
And were there any reports indicating high isofenfus levels in Peony Estates wine?
Yes, the toxicology report from a bottle of 2019 Care wine that the Rapid River Police Department forwarded to my office.
Your Honor, permission to screen share what has already been pre-admitted as Exhibit 10?
Please do.
Can you please tell the jury what you see on your screen?
This is the toxicology report for June 9th, 2019, indicating high levels of isofenfus.
And where was this pesticide sample found?
According to this report, this sample was collected from the inside of a bottle of 2019 Cara wine. This is the same type of wine I told them to dispose of.
How did these isofenfis levels compare to the FDA maximum limit?
These levels are exceeding the amount permitted by the FDA.
Were you able to make a conclusion regarding the presence of health code violations during the production of the 2019 cycle of wine at Peony Estates?
Yes, I was.
And what was that conclusion?
Based on my professional education, training, and experience, there were 4 health code violations and several health hazards pertaining to improper pesticide use and drainage during the time the 2019 Cara bottles of wine were being produced at Peony Estates.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Cross-examination for counselor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Ms. Atkins O'Keefe, can you see and hear me clearly?
I can, yes.
So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the alleged 4th time that you investigated Peony Estates.
Okay.
So there was no 4th time, was there, Ms. Atkins O'Keefe?
I'm sorry?
As we are pursuing a negligence per se case, there is no 4th time you inspected Peony Estates, isn't that right?
I believe I did visit Peony Estates 4 times, once in 2015, once in 2018, and twice in 2019.
Your Honor, permission for co-counsel to display Special Instruction 7 on the screen.
Okay.
Your Honor, I do ask that this be constructively outside the view of the jury for purposes of the Zoom courtroom.
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Atkins O'Keefe, can you see what is available on the screen right now?
I can.
And would you read along with me? The following documents are only available if plaintiff chooses battery. 1, the deposition of Harper Martini, and 2, the report of Riley Atkins O'Keefe dated May 30th, 2019. If plaintiff chooses negligence per se, the deposition of Harper Martini and the report of Atkins O'Keefe dated May 30th, 2019 is not a part of the case and cannot be referenced during trial by either side. Did I read that correctly?
You did?
And isn't the 4th time you inspected Peony Estates, wasn't that dated May 30th of 2019 or 2018?
You are correct.
Thank you. Your Honor, permission to strike everything Ms. Atkins O'Keefe said about the 4th time she inspected Peony Estates.
Okay, response from counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm just referencing the special instruction. I do not believe that this this material should be stricken because she didn't go into her May 30th visit. She's merely mentioning that she went there. None of the health code violations that she observed in the early May of 2019 were a part of this May 30th visit.
Okay, so when you say weren't a part of that, you mean that she observed that they were no longer present and that they had been corrected, or that they were still present and that she didn't observe them, if that makes any sense. Just trying to parse through that statement just for a second.
Yeah, she observed the the 4 health code violations in early May of 2019. This special instructions referring to the visit in late May of 2019, and none of the violations were a part of that May 30th visit, Your Honor.
Okay,
Your
so
Honor.
just one second, Counselor. I'll promise I'll turn it over to you in a moment. Counselor, correct me if I'm wrong, but she did mention just the date May 30th and a visit to Peony Estates.
She referenced that it happened. Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, defense counsel, please respond.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Atkins O'Keefe testified on direct report that on the 4th time she visited, she saw the same bottle of Cara wine sitting on the counter, and she did not know if it was the right one. The same
Yeah, that's
one.
what I thought I heard. Can you turn me back to the special instruction really briefly, because I just want to reread that so I'm clear on that.
Can my co-counselor please put that back on the screen, please?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Take however long you need to do that. All right. let me take a look at this. So which special instruction are you referencing? I promise you I followed before. I just want to make sure before I rule on this issue that this is correct.
Yes, Your Honor. It's number 7, availability of documents.
Okay, cool.
Specifically, point 2, the report of Riley Atkins O'Keefe.
Okay, and that report, which according to the charge that plaintiff has filed, would indicate that there is no reference to the May 30th, 2019 date. It did not exist at all. Didn't happen. Like, does she say no, it didn't happen, or just like not mentioned?
It's non-existent. She did not make the 4th appearance to Peony Estates.
Okay, so I'm going to give my last response over to plaintiff's counsel on that, because I'm struggling to see how that, what you said and what her testimony is not a clear violation of that. Based on what counsel is saying, that did not happen for that report. And even her reference to that inspection, no matter how small it may be, is a violation of that, no two ways about it. So if there's something I'm missing here based on the special instruction interpretation that I have in front of me, or if there's some missing statement of your claim or the evidence, now's the time to tell me, because I'm gonna strike it barring based on what I know at the moment.
No, Your Honor, I believe that's how the rule should be interpreted. I do just ask that what you strike is limited to the mentioning of the May 30th visit and not the early May visit.
Okay, so I'm going to tell the jury to disregard and every bit of the comments referencing May 30th. That will be the only portion of it stricken, and it is stricken from the record, as I mentioned. So please proceed with your cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Atkins O'Keefe, you are a health inspector,
Yes,
and it's your job to conduct health and safety inspections of wineries.
it is.
So you ensure that wineries are safe
I do my best, yes.
and that the wine isn't contaminated with any dangerous substances.
Yes.
So obviously, if you observed a winery operating in a way that could risk the public's safety, you would do something about it.
I would.
And if you believe that the wine was contaminated with pesticides, you would test it,
Yes, I would.
or you would shut down the winery.
I would follow necessary protocols that could lead to shutting down a winery, yes.
So let's move to the 2018 inspection. That's the second time you visited Peony Estates, correct?
Correct.
And when you believe there's potential for danger, the proper protocol is to test the wine to make sure that it's not contaminated.
Yes.
And you did that on the 2018 inspection
Yes.
because you believe that the wine could have had pesticides in it.
Yes,
And you sent the tests off to a laboratory.
I did.
Would you recognize the results of that test if it was shown in court today?
I would.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 9.
Please do.
Ms. Atkins O'Keefe, do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
Could you tell us what it is?
It is a test collected from the samples of the barrels from my 2018 visit.
So according to this test, the wine at Peony Estates did not contain unsafe levels of contaminants.
That is correct.
At this point, the amount of isophenphos was below the reporting limit.
Yes, it was below the FDA maximum.
So it's perfectly legal for a wine to contain pesticides, isn't that right?
Yes, here
Below
it is.
an amount.
Yes.
So you found no violations of the health code,
Not here, I did not.
and thus you did not shut Peony Estates down.
No, I did not.
Now let's move to the 2019 inspection. You inspected the storage facility,
I did.
found no problems there.
Yes.
You went to the wine production area,
Yes.
again, no problems.
Yes.
And then you went to the bottling area.
Yes,
And this is where you say you found some problems.
I did. I found 4 health code violations.
Right. The bottling area contained bottles of wine, isn't that right?
That's true.
And also canisters of pesticides.
Yes.
And you mentioned on direct that they were right next to each other.
They're right near each other on the same shelf. Yes.
So you testified on direct that this has posed a clear risk to consumer health and safety.
Yes.
And like you said before, the proper protocol is to test the wine when you believe it may be contaminated.
Yes, sometimes.
So you tested the wine at that date?
I did not. I actually had the wine directly discarded as there was only one bottle. So I just thought it would be best just to throw it out.
Well, Ms. Atkins O'Keefe, you personally did not throw out the bottle of wine, did you?
I did not.
And you didn't test this bottle of Cara?
I did not. There was only one bottle.
You didn't test any other wine that day?
I did not.
So you don't know if any of the wine on the 2019 inspection actually contained pesticides?
I do not, but I do know the likelihood of it just because it was so close to pesticides.
So once again, you did not test the wine despite there being a serious risk of pesticide contamination?
No, I did not.
And you do not know if any of the wine was actually contaminated at Peony Estates that day?
I don't.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, any redirect examination rather based off of that?
No redirect based on that, Your Honor. May
Okay.
this witness speak?
Yes, this witness is excused, excuse me. Give me 30 seconds just to write some comments, and then we will bring up the third witness. Okay, Ed, Andrew, you guys ready? Awesome. So turn it over to the third witness.
The plaintiff would like to call Casey Soto to the stand.
Okay, wonderful. And Ms. Soto, you understand you are under oath.
Yes, I do.
Okay, good morning. Please proceed. Ms. Soto, we're sorry for your loss.
Now, can you introduce yourself for the court?
My name is Casey Soto.
And Casey, I know it's difficult for you, but do you think you can tell us why you're here today?
My father is Harper Martini, who owns Peony Estates, and Genesis was my fiance before he died.
Now, before we talk about Peony Estates, let's talk about your late fiance. How did you and Genesis meet?
Well, we met at a party at Rosary and Pedre Winery in 2012 and officially started dating a month later. And we've just been inseparable ever since. Genesis was always the life of the party. He got along with everyone. Well, everyone except Harper.
And how long were you together before you got engaged?
3 years.
And did Genesis have any health problems?
No, Genesis was honestly the picture of health. He was the most active person that I knew. He was always up at least at 8 a.m. on the weekends for some big activity. He always had me up for hiking. I was never really a morning person, but honestly, I would give anything to just go on another morning hike with him.
And was he ever diagnosed with liver disease, hepatic disease, or any other disease?
No, absolutely not. Like I said, he never had any health problems. He was just bragged about how he had the health of a collegiate athlete.
When did you get engaged?
We got engaged in July of 2018.
What happened after your engagement?
Well, we started planning our wedding at Rosary and Pedre Winery since that's really where our love story began. We met through mutual friends at the winery years ago at a party there, and that's what we were planning until Harper found out.
Why did Harper get involved?
Harper always wanted to have my wedding at Peony. He said it would be good publicity for the business and that it was needed. I wasn't really keen on having it at Peony, but it just seemed like a better idea financially. And I mean, it was nostalgic because the winery was part of my childhood, I guess. So I was familiar with it since I worked there growing up.
And why did Peony Estates need business?
Harper said something about a massive leak in the storage barn and that the only options were to spend money repairing the damages or move everything from the storage barn since it was the only place large enough to
store everything.
And what was in the storage barn that had to be moved?
Landscaping tools, pesticides, cleaning supplies, that type of stuff.
And what did Mr. Martini do when this leak occurred?
He said that they would start relocating things and then move them back once Peony Estates made enough profit to warrant the expensive repairs. I don't really know if Peony Estates ever actually raised enough money to make the repairs, but seeing how much Harper wanted the wedding at Peony, I promised to at least mention the offer to Genesis.
Do you know if the leak was ever repaired?
No.
Was there anything that happened to Peony Estates that made you concerned for the wedding?
Well, I did read a memo that Austin sent to the employees of Peony Estates.
And who is Austin?
Austin is the head winemaker guy at Peony.
Do you work at Peony Estates?
No, but Harper wanted me to take over the company when she retired, so he had me on all the company memos, so I was aware of what was going on.
And so what was the memo about?
It talked about some kind of infestation and that they needed to quickly spray pesticides so they would not lose any more profit and that nothing else mattered.
Were there any other doubts you had about the wedding at Peony Estates?
Yeah. At one point, Harper told me about a bad inspection that he was really worried about. Harper reassured me that my wedding would still happen and there shouldn't be any problems. Peony Estates apparently needed to change how their pesticide was stored. He made it sound so dangerous and unsafe that I seriously considered moving the wedding date to make sure no one got hurt. And I just wish I would have, looking back on it.
Why didn't you move the wedding?
During our conversation, Harper wouldn't tell me why there was a problem, but reassured me that most of the things that needed to be fixed were just formalities, like installing signs to wash their employees to wash their hands. But looking back, I just wish I would have gone with my first instinct and moved the wedding, and maybe none of this would have ever happened and Genesis would still be here today.
Now, Ms. Soto, I'm really sorry.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Response.
I would like to ask what defense is referring to as to speculative.
Just defense counsel, can you clarify, please?
It would have never happened if he would still be here today.
Okay, plaintiff's response to that.
Ms. Soto is just using her rationally based perception that she believes that Mr. Petrillo would died from something at the estates, and she thinks if she moved the wedding or didn't have the wedding there, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I think the statement is pretty finely worded. I understand your objection, but given the plaintiff's contention, of course, and she's part of that claim, is that the poison at Peony Estates and the wine had something to do with, or was the main cause rather, of her fiance's death. Her contention is that was the major antecedent to that, and that if they just moved, it wouldn't have been a problem. So I understand where she's coming from. Of course, the jury can weigh it as clearly a layperson's perception without expert foundation, but it's the decedent's fiance. I'm going to let her do that, but your objection's noted.
Now, Ms. Soto, I'm sorry to ask this, but do you know how Genesis died?
Yeah. The doctor said that he died of poisoning and it was most likely pesticides.
Now, when you found out that Genesis had died from pesticide poisoning, what was your first thought?
I just kept thinking about Genesis and our life together. And I don't know why, but I couldn't get it out of the back of my mind. But I just kept thinking about Peony Estates.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. No further questions.
Cross-examination. Ms. Soto, are you all right to go on?
Yeah.
Okay, cross-examination.
Okay, yes, Your Honor. Ms. Soto, can you hear and see me okay?
Yeah.
And I'd like to extend my deepest condolences, and I want to make this as easy for you as possible. So take all the time you need. Most of my questions can be answered by a simple yes or no. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
And you met Genesis in 2012?
Yeah, I did.
And the night you met him, he was at the beer pong table, correct?
Yeah, I think so. We've met at the winery, like I mentioned.
So he was drinking alcohol the first night you met him, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we were at a winery. Everybody was drinking.
And you did say that he was a blast to be around?
Yeah, he had the biggest personality. I mean, you were always just drawn to him.
And you dated for several years, and he finally proposed to you in 2018?
Right.
And then you proceeded to choose to have your wedding at Peony Estates, correct?
Right. Like I said, we were looking at Rosary and Pedre Winery since, we were close friends with them, and Harper had even worked there. It was just so clean and just a beautiful winery, but it just made more sense financially to have it at Harper's Winery.
And you have spent several summers working at Peony Estates?
Yes, I have.
So you are familiar with like their winemaking process and their use of pesticides?
I'm not sure about their winemaking process or their pesticides. I mean, I volunteered a few times, but I wasn't really interested in the business.
So based on the best of your knowledge, you don't know of anyone who's died from drinking Peony Estates wine before June of 2019?
No, not to my knowledge.
And okay. And about a month prior to your wedding, you had a pre-wedding party at the infamous Black Bear Casino?
Objection, relevance.
Where's this going, counsel?
Wait, excuse me? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Counselor, what's the relevance of this? Where's it going?
This speaks directly to our case theory that Genesis could develop hepatic disease from excessive alcohol use.
Okay, so how is the black bear disease going to factor into that? Can you just make it proper?
At the Black Bear Casino, Genesis consumed lots of alcohol and became very sick afterwards.
Okay, plaintiff's response.
The Black Bear Casino has nothing to do with this trial today, and what occurred there does not have to do with the charge at hand.
Well, like counselor said, I think it's foundational to their overall theory that prior conduct and prior alcohol consumption specifically would have led to the decedent's death. So I'm going to give them the room to explore that, given that's where they say it's going. If we don't get there at some point and we're just effectively trashing, the decedent's character through gambling characteristics, please feel free to renew your objection. But so far as it's related to their medical theory, I'm going to allow them to explore it. So overruled.
Okay. And at the casino, Genesis got very drunk that night, correct?
Yeah, I mean, he was drinking. Everyone was.
And I understand you were too, so that your memory may be hazy. But to the best of your knowledge, you do remember him getting very sick and throwing up multiple times, correct?
Objection, speculation.
Can you explain?
The I think defense is trying to have Ms. Soto speculate as to why Mr. Petrillo became sick that night, speculate that it was the alcohol or it could have been another cause.
Can you respond to that, defense counsel?
In her affidavit, she claimed that she consumed an excessive amount of alcohol that night along with Genesis.
Forget her affidavit. What did she just say? Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of what she said is, you asked her, you said that she was drunk.
I'm not speaking to the causation. I'm just asking if he did get sick.
Right. That's my understanding as well. Plaintiff's counsel, any response to that? If I'm misremembering or misinterpreting, please let me know.
If defense's question is just like if Mr. Petrillo was sick, then I have no objection.
Okay, so I'm, insofar as that may be straight outside of it, I don't exactly remember, going to limit the comments to that specifically, and the record will reflect that. And counselor, just please keep that in mind when you ask those questions, and the witness can respond. So I guess partially sustained, partially overruled.
So you did remember him getting sick and throwing up, correct?
I think I'm not for sure, but I think that he did get sick and may have thrown up.
Okay, thank you. And you had your rehearsal dinner on June 7th, correct?
Yeah.
And at around 10 p.m., Genesis was presented with a bottle of wine from your parent, correct?
Yeah, that's right, with the Cara wine bottle.
And Genesis was never one to turn down a bottle of wine.
I mean, no, I guess not. It was a gift.
So he opened up the bottle and poured several glasses.
He poured 2 glasses, I think, not several.
And he didn't offer the second glass to you.
Not that I remember, no.
And then you proceeded to go to bed while Genesis mingled with the guests at the party, correct?
Right, I usually went to bed early.
So is it true that you don't know how much wine Genesis consumed that night because you went to bed?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Okay, any redirect examination based off that?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Soto, you are excused. And again, our deepest condolences to you for your loss. And we deeply extend our heartfelt sympathies. You're excused. And so that is the end of the plaintiff's case in chief, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Defense, are you ready to proceed or do you want a moment? How do you want to do it? It looks like we're good on time. So
Can we have a brief 5 to 10 minute recess, please?
we'll split the difference and call it 7. So 11:45 is by my watch when we'll be back. So everybody do what you got to do. Maybe everybody quit.
Oh, here we go.
Time to start just arbitrarily deducting points for anyone who's late. Your score goes down by like 3 per minute. Oh, that got people back. Do we have everyone back or no? We do? Okay. I'm going to take everyone.
Thank you. Has everybody returned, Your Honor?
Awesome. In defense, you guys are good?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So let's go ahead and go to defense. First witness.
The defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
Okay. Mr. Lewis, you understand you are under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Lewis, can you see and hear me clearly?
I can, thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, my name is Austin Lewis.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the head winemaker at Peony Estates, which is a vineyard owned by Harper Martini here in Midlands.
How long have you worked in the wine industry?
I've been in the wine industry my entire life. My mom was in charge of production at a winery when I was born, so my first word was wine. I learned to drive on winery tractors. My college degree is in enology, the study of making wine. I mean, wine has been at the center of my universe for as long as I can remember.
When did you start working at Peony Estates?
I began at Peony in January of 2015. Since I've come on board, I've been in charge of the winemaking while Harper's handled the business side of things.
And what are some of your duties as head winemaker?
I'm glad you asked. As head winemaker or vintner, I oversee the growing, harvesting, fermentation, aging, and bottling of our wine.
Now, do you know who Genesis Petrillo is?
I do, yeah. Genesis is the one that passed away the morning before Genesis's wedding to Casey Soto, Harper's daughter. Genesis estate is suing Peony because they think she was poisoned by pesticides in Cara 2019 vintage batch.
Now, before we start talking about Cara specifically, I'd like to ask you more about pesticides in general. Do you use pesticides at Peony Estates?
Yeah, we have to. Peony is located right next to the Slough Swamp, so we have a lot of critters that like to feed on our grapes.
And how common is it for wineries like Peony Estates to use pesticides?
Very common. In fact, it's the norm.
And how long have you been using pesticides at Peony Estates?
Since 2015.
Now, prior to 2019, what, if any, problems has Peony Estates had with pesticides in their bottled wine?
No unsafe levels of pesticides have ever been detected in Peony Estates wine. Our wine was even tested in 2018 by the FDA, and it was found to be safe.
Now, let's turn to this case in particular. Do you believe that the wine Petrillo drank was contaminated with pesticides?
Objection.
No, I don't.
Foundation.
You explain?
This witness has not testified that he tested the bottle of Genesis Petrillo's wine before he was taken. Additionally, Your Honor, he's not an expert and does not meet the qualifications under Rule 702.
Response, Counselor.
Your Honor, this is the head winemaker of Peony Estates who personally oversaw the making of Cara wine. And I'm just asking whether or not he believes that, like, any point during that process, there would have been a contamination because he personally oversaw it.
Okay, response, plaintiff's counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel's question was asking if there were pesticides at an unsafe level in Genesis Petrillo's wine specifically. While this witness does have qualifications on the winemaking process in general, he has no expertise to make an opinion regarding the safe levels of pesticides or the foundation laid necessary to determine if if Genesis Petrillo's bottle of wine specifically might have had pesticides in it.
I agree. I think for the witness to opine specifically on a particular bottle of wine that was ingested by a particular person, I need to hear a lot of foundation about his involvement with that bottle of wine, how he can identify it, trace it to that person, the decedent in this case, how he knows the level of pesticides that would exist in it, whether there's a process that would be contaminated by or not be contaminated by. There's toxicology screening, which we would need to get a lot of bits on. So I think there's a lot missing. He can maybe generally opine on pesticide process. I understand that's probably where he's going to go, but for this specific question, I don't think he has the foundation to do that. So I'm going to sustain the objection and I'm going to strike the testimony.
Earlier you mentioned the 3 steps of the winemaking process. What are those 3 steps?
Oh, I'd love to talk about the winemaking process. The first step is viticulture. That's when we grow and harvest the grape. The second step is production. That's when we crush the grapes and store them in barrels for fermentation. And the third step is bottling. That's pretty self-explanatory.
Let's start with the first step. Did you use pesticides on the Cara grapes while they were growing?
Yes, we did.
Now, in your opinion, as a lifelong winemaker and the maker of Cara wine, what is the likelihood that pesticides entered the Cara wine during this stage?
Well, that would be almost impossible because of the topography of our vineyard.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, improper expert opinion pursuant to Rule 702.
A response, Your Honor?
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was muted still. Can you explain plaintiff's counsel? My apologies.
Yes.
You want me to explain or defense counsel?
Yeah, start with you and then we'll turn it over to defense.
Yes, Your Honor. This is an improper expert opinion because this witness, while they can testify about how to make wine, they don't know the specifics of the specific dangers of pesticide in the wine itself, Your Honor.
Can you respond, Counselor?
Your Honor, I would argue that this witness has sufficient knowledge, being that he has been in the winemaking industry for a very long time, has been working at Peony Estates since 2015, and personally oversaw this winemaking process. Therefore, he does have the specialized and sufficient knowledge in order to say whether or not during this process, this is a risk. It's part of his job as head winemaker to know the risks involved in pesticides in the winemaking process. If the head winemakers of different wineries didn't know this risk, that would mean a lot of trouble for wineries everywhere.
Can you remind me of your question? 1 second, plaintiff's counsel. I'll ask you to corroborate this in a moment, but can you remind me of your specific question?
That in his opinion, as a lifelong winemaker and the maker of this wine, specifically Cara wine, what is the likelihood that pesticides entered the Cara wine while the grapes are growing?
So are you utilizing him as a 702 expert and trying to get an expert proffer out of him as to this situation?
In this situation, yes, because he does have the sufficient specialized knowledge in order to come to this conclusion or assess the likelihood.
Okay, so plaintiff's response, and this will be the last we'll hear of it.
Yes, Your Honor. This witness is not a chemist, has no expertise or training in how to measure chemical pesticides or the concentration of those pesticides in wine. Additionally, they don't have the proper education to properly evaluate their compliance. The risk or exact likelihood, as opposing counsel worded it, of pesticides being contaminated. As a winemaker, though, this witness can testify only to their compliance with already preset health code recommendations, Ron.
I agree with counselor. I think if you're going for a 702 foundation opinion, there's a whole lot missing that he mentioned in terms of chemist. And I understand that there's maybe a little bit of a gray area, but I don't think a whole lot with respect to his winemaking prowess. But also just, process, how we would be able to test for this, whether there's reliability. It opens a threshold to so many other things that I don't think we're laying the foundation of. I will say, I think the route that you could go and maybe are going is speaking of the protocols at the winery, specifically what that's designed to prevent, the overall pesticidal risk that may exist for wine and contamination, and going into that general process and maybe speaking how that was, as counselor mentioned just now, followed with respect to the situation and how maybe that's not led to any other contamination situations, right? Like, if 6,000 bottles of wine have gone out through the same process, there's never been any contamination, no one else has died, and in this circumstance, those exact protocols were followed, the jury can reasonably infer what exactly this could be. So I would stick to that overall. Right now, you're going and straying too far, and that is my direction as to what you should do. So I'm going to sustain the objection and strike the answer.
Yes, Your Honor. Could you tell us a little bit about the topography of the vineyard?
Yes, of course. Our vineyard is on a long slope. We plant up the entire height of the slope, and we also plant along a nearly flat strip of land at the bottom of the slope. Sometimes water could pull up at the bottom of this portion of the slope, and that water could contain higher concentrations of pesticide.
Where did the grapes for Cara wine grow on this slope?
Yeah, so the grapes used for Cara actually were grown at the top of the slope, which was the furthest away from these from these pools of water.
Now, let's talk about the second step, wine production. Was pesticide ever used around where the grapes were crushed and fermented?
Yes, we sprayed chemical pesticide around the foundations of our production buildings and in the wine cave where our wine ferments in casks.
Now, what are the safety measures that you take at Peony Estates during this process?
Yeah. Before spraying, we would empty the area of any wine or wine precursors, remove all winemaking equipment, or wrap the equipment extensively in plastic wrap before spraying. And after spraying, we would leave the area untouched for at least 48 hours.
Now, have you ever had any problems with pesticides at this stage?
Like I said, we always used our pesticides with the utmost caution, so no. But once one of our employees got lazy, ignored protocol, and put our pesticides in the wrong storage barn, but I mean, that's totally harmless. There's nothing in that barn except brooms and rakes.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper expert opinion that it's totally harmless to violate health code. This witness does not have qualifications based on your prior ruling to make that claim.
Response to defense counsel.
Your Honor, this was not an expert opinion. This was his rationally based perception, because this witness is just saying by having something somewhere, not seeing it being sprayed, he did not perceive harm.
Plaintiff's counsel response.
Yes, Your Honor. This witness, an employee of Peony Estates, it's not a rationally based perception to think that the health code's just wrong and that it's harmless to violate it. This witness is not able to make that claim without the proper expertise that the health officials who actually make that health code have gone through.
So, okay, I'm ready to rule on this. I think defense counsel, there's a line kind of to walk on this that's sort of consistent with the theme in the past, wherein if he just took out the phrase, it's harmless, right? Like I, as a juror member or a layperson, can draw the connection of this dude put something in a barn, there's nothing there but rakes and grass. I'm able to tell you that there's probably nothing that's going to happen with that I can, put two and two together and I'll take him at his word. But the minute he goes down the rabbit hole of it's totally harmless, then we cross into a threshold of, does he understand potentially, I don't know, contamination levels that could exist within that barn, whether something could leak down into that area from runoff or whatever else, whether that could be exposed and travel through the air, right? Like there's a whole lot of stuff there potentially that I would take issue with and would say that his opinion could go into without having foundation for it. But like I said, I think you get there with just the math I spelled out, 2 + 2 on that. We put it in there, there's nothing else in there. You do the math on it, same. So I'm going to sustain the objection and strike that portion of the answer that I mentioned, but keep the rest of it that I think is okay. So please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, let's talk about the last step, bottling. Were pesticides ever used around the bottling area?
Yes, they were. When we sprayed the production facilities, we also sprayed our bottling plant.
And could you tell us a little bit about how spraying pesticides works, like how you sprayed pesticides?
Yes, so as I previously mentioned, when we do spray pesticides, we do one of two things. Either when we're spraying outside, we spray around the foundations of the building, and when we spray inside, we remove all wine and wine precursors, and we extensively plastic wrap what we cannot remove.
Well, physically, how would you go about this process?
Well, generally, when we bring the pesticide canisters into the building to spray inside, we have to physically remove the cap off of the top of each pesticide canister and then press down a button for the pesticide to release out. So it's a very intentional process, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Now, do you know what would happen if someone were to ingest pesticides?
Yeah, unfortunately I do. One time, one of our employees, Kirby, poor Kirby, accidentally sprayed a glass that he was drinking out of.
And how much pesticide did this employee ingest?
Well, he only had a couple tiny sips. I mean, he couldn't even taste it. And generally, pesticide dissolves fully in wine. It doesn't sit on the top like oil or sink to the bottom like sediment. So Kirby could have only had like a minuscule amount.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, improper expert opinion.
Can you explain?
This witness does not know the chemics of how pesticide dissolves in wine or the way that it settles or dissolves in any way, and cannot testify about that without the proper education, experience, and training pursuant to 702.
Okay, defense counsel response.
This does not require that you know the exact chemical formula of how this process happens. When something doesn't dissolve, you can see it physically on the top, or you can see chunks at the bottom. And this witness is just testifying that you don't see it on the top and you don't see it on the bottom.
Yeah, plaintiff's counsel response.
Yeah, if Your Honor would strike all the testimony except for that he didn't physically see chunks of pesticide in the wine, I have no objection to that. But as to the specific specific statement of the pesticides dissolved into the wine or whether they were traceable or untraceable, that would require a degree in chemistry or viniculture or enology to know that specific requirement, Your Honor.
Okay, defense counsel responds to that. I'm kind of liking this objection, so defense counsel.
Well, this witness never said the rate of dissolving or anything really scientific like that.
Can you refresh?
He was just saying it dissolved because you couldn't see it on top or bottom.
Can you refresh my memory of his exact answer? Because I just want to make sure I know exactly what we're talking about. So can you just remind me of that?
Mr. Lewis, would you like to repeat your answer?
That'd be great. Mr. Lewis, can you do that?
Yes, absolutely. I just described how Mr. Doolittle only had a couple of tiny sips and how that pesticide fully dissolves in wine and it can't sit on the top like oil or sink to the bottom like sediment. So Kirby could have only had a minuscule amount and he wouldn't have even known.
Okay, plaintiff's response, and this will be the final word on it.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm going into the specifics of how it sinks or rises or how I think that's a breach of 702, Your Honor.
So I think I completely get where you're coming from. I think just rational perception on this, right? That's what he's going to use in that circumstance. And right, think about, I think the great connection was, oil, vinegar, all that stuff. You can see where it sits and all that sort of thing. We kind of can just take a look at oil spills and know what oil does, right, in water. So I'm going to let that go. And I'm going to overrule that bit of it. The dissolution bit, I understand where you're coming from, specifically on that point. But I just think based off perception, that's okay. I think the lack of rising or falling, totally all right. Dissolution, I think, is oddly a more chemical process, but I'm going to overrule on that front as well. And we'll say it goes to weight, not admissibility. So please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. And what happened to Kirby after he drank just a little bit of pesticide?
Well, he got sick right away. I mean, he had to be taken straight to the hospital. He almost died.
And are you familiar with Exhibit 10, Mr. Lewis?
I am, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, my co-counsel would like to put Exhibit 10 on the screen.
What is it, before we do that, what is Exhibit 10? I just want to make sure that
Exhibit 10 is the bottle test report.
Okay, and you said this witness is familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay, counsel can display.
Do you see the report, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, I do.
Could you read aloud the additional notes by the client that you notice on this report?
Yes. It states that the sample was collected on June 9th, 2019, from the inside of an empty bottle of Cara wine found in the trash by a Rapid River police officer.
Thank you. And we can take this off of the screen. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to read Stipulation 17 onto the record.
Any objection?
Stipulation 17 says that a canister of bug-off pesticide.
I just want to make sure plaintiff's counsel has no objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Plaintiff's counsel, any objection?
No objection to reading the stipulation into the record, Your Honor.
Okay, please proceed, defense counsel. Didn't mean to cut you off.
Stipulation 17 reads that a canister of bug-off pesticide was also found in the same dumpster in which the Rapid River Valley Police Department found exhibits 2A and 2B, 2A being the bottle that was tested in that report we just saw.
Okay, plaintiff's counsel, is that copacetic for you?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
No further questions at this time.
Great. So we will turn it over to cross-examination. Actually, Mr. Lewis, really quickly, Kirby Doolittle, was that your intern?
He was just an employee.
He's always been incompetent. He's shown up at previous situations over the course of the Midlands, and he's always been very, very unintelligent. So anyway, cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Austin Lewis. I'd like to talk with you about Peony Estates' use of chemical pesticides.
Sure.
You mentioned on direct, Peony Estates borders a swamp, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, we border the Solove Swamp. Got a lot of critters.
Yeah, there were lots of bugs at the winery, right?
There were lots of bugs at the winery, yes. At some points, I should say.
Yeah, you tried to get rid of those bugs, right?
Generally, yes. As a good winemaker, that's what I do.
And you first tried using organic methods, right?
Yeah, initially, I like to stay organic, keep everything clean, nice. And I also like that organic label on our wine. It just brings us up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but organic methods were too costly for Peony Estates, weren't they?
Very expensive, very expensive. It's like shopping at the Whole Foods, but we could only go to like Aldi or Walmart. You know what I mean? Nothing wrong with that, but Whole Foods is just better.
Yes, I'd like to ask you to answer my questions with a yes or a no, unless it's unable to do so. Is that okay?
Absolutely, sure, yeah. If I need to elaborate, I'll elaborate.
Now, Harper Martini suggested that you use chemical pesticides on crops, true?
That's correct, yeah.
But you vigorously opposed this.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I like that organic label. You know, it's the Whole Foods. You want to be the Whole Foods of Midlands.
Well, you were concerned that this would lead to unsafe levels of pesticide, weren't you?
Yeah, that was one of the concerns I had.
And Harper Martini told you were moving to chemical pesticides anyway, true?
Harper Martini is the boss, yeah.
He said you were doing this whether you liked it or not.
That's correct.
I'd like to talk about the way that Peony Estates stored this chemical pesticide.
Sure.
In October of 2015, you trained your employees on how to store it, right?
That's right. They did receive extensive training on storage and handling of pesticides.
You told them to keep the pesticides far away from the wine production area?
That's correct, yes.
But your employees didn't listen to you, did they?
Well, one of our employees did get lazy once, and unfortunately, they didn't follow proper protocol.
And so Peony Estates got cited for improperly storing pesticides, true?
That's right. But of course, there was no danger in that situation. It was just a simple mishap.
I'm not asking you about what you think of the health code. I'm asking you if you violated it. That time
Right.
you violated health code, didn't you?
Yes, we did. But of course, there was no danger.
Now, in July of 2018, you also had another infestation.
Yes, unfortunately, we did.
This infestation was in the wine cave and bottling area, true?
That's right, yes.
And again, Harper Martini had you use chemical pesticides.
Yeah, I mean, we had to get rid of those critters. Chemical pesticides is the most effective way to do it.
And again, in 2018, you got cited for violating health code, true?
Yes, that's right. But of course, once again, just a simple mishap. There was no danger.
Okay, well, in May of 2019, you had another bug infestation, true?
Yes, that's correct. Unfortunately, we did have another bug infestation. As I mentioned earlier, we're right next to the Solove Swamp, so we get a lot of critters.
And to solve it, you moved pesticides into the building, right?
Yes, generally that's how we spray pesticides, by moving them into the building.
Well, you moved it in before taking the wine bottles out of the area, didn't you?
Yes, but as I explained in direct, there's no danger because when you have these canisters of pesticide, in order to actually spray the pesticide, first you have to remove the safety cap and then you have to press down the button, which actually sprays the pesticide out. So there's no danger in having that.
Your Honor, permission to strike the witness's answer about there being no danger is non-responsive.
Defense counsel responds. Why is it responsive?
Your Honor, this witness is simply describing the process and why they do this process, which I think is important in terms of establishing the safety protocols of Peony Estates.
So I agree with the premise of your response. The issue is just kind of what we dealt with on direct, where he was taking a few steps into it's safe or it's not safe, and not kind of keeping his restraint on just the protocols and methodology and past results even. So I'm going to strike that portion of the answer, and please proceed, counsel.
You'd put pesticides in before removing plastic wrapping, before plastic wrapping your equipment, true?
Yeah, so when we moved the pesticide in, we still left some equipment not plastic wrap. But as I stated, when you have these pesticide canisters, you have to remove the cap and press down the button to spray.
Now, having pesticides in an active production area is a health code violation, even with that cap on, true?
Yes, it is. But of course, that was not an active production area. No production was going on when the pesticides were actually in the bottling area, but there was still equipment in there.
Now, after this health code violation, you were ordered to retrain your employees, true?
Yes, that's correct.
But Harper Martini specifically told you not to.
Well, you have to understand that we had already been extensively trained. But yes, that is correct.
So you went against the health code inspector's orders?
Yes, but as I had said, we had already been extensively trained in the handling and storage of pesticide. We only had one little mishap that time.
Well, Harper Martini said that a little bit of pesticide wasn't a big deal to her, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect based off of that?
Briefly, Your Honor.
It can be brief or long, whatever you want.
Mr. Lewis, you mentioned your response to the citation brought up on cross. What did you do after you were told you needed to train employees?
Yeah, great question. So we actually put up signs and we made sure that safety was extremely emphasized. I mean, of course, it already is at Peony Estates, but we just wanted to make sure that every employee saw it every day.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross based on that?
Not based on that, Your Honor.
Okay, this witness may be excused with the recommendation to terminate Kirby Doolittle if you haven't already. He's been involved in a few lawsuits over the course of the years, and he's nothing but trouble. So, defense may call their second witness.
The defense calls Dr. Rachel Cannon to the stand.
Dr. Cannon. Dr. Cannon, can you make...
Hello, Dr. Cannon. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Dr. Cannon, you understand you're under oath?
Yes.
Perfect, please proceed.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Cannon.
And what do you do for a living, Dr. Cannon?
I'm a medical doctor with expertise in both toxicology and pharmacology.
And where did you go to school?
I got my bachelor's in chemistry at Ohio State University, and I got my medical degree from Harvard.
And what about your professional experience?
Well, after I finished my medical degree and finished my residency, I worked as the chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. After that, I took a faculty position as professor of toxicology at Midlands Medical School, and currently I'm working as an associate consultant at Gardner Consulting.
And have you testified in court before?
Yes, I've testified in over 35 legal cases.
And why are you here today?
I was retained by the defense to assess the findings of Dr. Jimin Kwan regarding Genesis Petrillo's cause of death.
What materials did you rely on in coming to your conclusion?
I reviewed a number of documents when I was coming to my conclusions, including toxicology reports, analytical reports, Genesis Petrillo's death certificate, and of course, Dr. Kwan's own report.
And were those materials sufficient?
Yes, they were. I didn't get a chance to review the body since it had already been cremated by the time I was detained, but the materials I had at my disposal were more than sufficient.
And you mentioned you were hired to review Dr. Kwan's findings. What were those findings?
Well, according to Dr. Kwan, Genesis Petrillo died from an overdose of pesticides, specifically isophenphous organophosphates. Dr. Kwan claimed that there was a lethal dose of these pesticides mixed into the bottle of Cara wine.
And do you agree with that conclusion?
In part, here's the thing. It's possible that organophosphates were the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death, but none of the evidence that Dr. Kwan provides establishes that to any reasonable degree of scientific certainty.
What do you mean?
Well, there are several other potential causes of death that would generally be consistent with the symptoms that Genesis Petrillo displayed on the night of June 7th.
Were there any other possible causes of Genesis Petrillo's death?
Yeah, so those causes would be first, alcohol poisoning, a severe allergic reaction, or hepatic disease.
I'd like to focus on that last one, hepatic disease. What is that exactly?
Well, hepatic is just a fancy way of saying liver. So hepatic disease is liver disease.
This might sound like a pretty basic question, doctor, but it's been a while since I've taken high school biology. What does the liver do?
The liver regulates the chemical contents of the bloodstream. So, for example, let's take a chemical we all closely associate with the liver, alcohol. When a person ingests alcohol, it becomes absorbed in their bloodstream. As the blood and alcohol pump through the liver uses enzymes in order to break this alcohol down into molecules that the body can safely excrete.
If that's how a healthy liver works, what's different about a liver with hepatic disease?
Well, a liver with hepatic disease has scar tissue, where a healthy liver would have functioning cells. This scar tissue can't effectively break down toxins and nutrients, so your body is starved for the things it needs to operate, and toxins build up in the bloodstream.
Can someone die from hepatic disease?
Absolutely. Hepatic disease can be fatal, especially if the scar tissue becomes so severe that you can no longer regulate the chemical contents of your bloodstream at all.
And how does someone get hepatic disease?
Well, as I've been hinting at, and as you probably suspect, reckless alcohol consumption is the leading cause of hepatic disease, culminating in liver failure.
All right, now I'd like to shift gears and talk specifically about Mr. Petrillo. Do you have any reason to believe that hepatic disease was the cause of his death?
Yes, all of the symptoms that Genesis Petrillo displayed on June 7th are consistent with hepatic disease.
And what symptoms did he display before his death?
Nausea, vomiting, contracted pupils, lethargy, abdominal pain, incontinence, involuntary muscle twitching, and finally, respiratory failure.
And which of the symptoms displayed by Genesis Petrillo are also associated with liver failure?
Nausea, vomiting, contracted pupils, lethargy, abdominal pain, incontinence, involuntary muscle twitching, and respiratory failure.
Is there anything that points away from liver failure as a likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's death?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, there's jaundice that's a common symptom of hepatic disease. And Dr. Kwan never references jaundice one way or the other in his report. So I can't know for sure if Genesis had the symptom. Another thing is that hepatic disease happens gradually rather than all of a sudden. So if Genesis, we can't look back at Genesis's medical records to see if Genesis had hepatic disease because Genesis didn't get regular blood tests.
Is there anything that would make that conclusion more likely?
Well, if Genesis displayed any of the symptoms of hepatic disease in the months leading up to his death, that would certainly bolster the conclusion that it was hepatic disease because this disease builds up over time. Also, if Genesis engaged in alcohol abuse or just, had a drink every now and then, that would bolster that conclusion because alcohol is a risk factor.
And what are your overall conclusions about today's case, Dr. Cannon?
Well, based on the evidence that I've reviewed, I think it's certainly too hasty to conclude that the cause of death was pesticide poisoning. It could also have been alcohol poisoning, a severe allergic reaction, or, as we discussed in great detail, hepatic disease.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Okay, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cannon. Dr. Cannon, you're a consultant, correct?
Yes, I am.
Now, Dr. Kwan found that Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, those were Dr. Kwan's findings.
Currently, one of your company's clients is Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer, correct?
Yes, that's one of my company's clients. We have many.
That company makes chemical pesticides.
Yes, they do.
Pesticides like the one that was found by Dr. Kwan to kill Genesis Petrillo.
I'm not familiar with the specific pesticides that they produce. I only know that they're a pesticide company.
A pesticide was found by Dr. Kwan to kill Genesis Petrillo.
Yes.
And Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer makes chemical pesticides. Is that correct?
That's correct. But to me, my reputation as an expert is much more important to me than my company's client.
Now, Dr. Cannon, you had a conversation with Detsky Roach CEO Eli Harrison, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
He talked to you when he found out that you were involved in this case.
Yes, he said that he preferred, he said that he had an interest in this case.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Your Honor, this is not hearsay under Rule 801 because it's not being used for the truth of the matter asserted, rather than it's used for the effect on the listener. You will hear that the actual statement that Dr. Cannon heard from Mr. Harrison was that it was extremely important, if you want to continue to have our business, that a pesticide not be found responsible for Genesis Petrillo's death. And this would have a direct effect on a listener, Dr. Cannon, whose job it was in today's case was to assess the findings of Dr. Kwan, who ruled that a pesticide was found for Genesis Petrillo's death.
Defense counsel, any response to that?
No, Your Honor. I stand by my objection, though.
Okay, I'm going to overrule. I think this is pretty clearly an effect on the listener because she's being sort of coerced. So I'm going to overrule the objection.
Dr. Cannon, I'll ask the question to you again. The CEO of Detsky Roach told you that it was extremely important, if you want to continue to have our business, that a pesticide not be found responsible for Genesis Petrillo's death.
Right, but again, Detsky Roach is my company's client, and to me, a source of income being a legal consultant is much more important to me than my company's client.
Dr. Cannon, I want to talk about your conclusion in today's case. You conclude that many diagnoses cannot be ruled out today.
Yes, that's true.
I want to talk about one of those diagnoses, hepatic disease.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you said some interesting things on direct examination that I want to reiterate. You said on direct that you have reason to believe that Genesis Petrillo could have died from fatal hepatic disease. Is that correct?
Yes, those were one of the causes that I looked at.
And you prepared a report for today's case, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Would you recognize that report if I showed it to you here today?
I would.
Your Honor, permission to screen share the report of Dr. Cannon.
Go ahead.
Let's see, one moment. Dr. Cannon and judges, are you able to see the screen shared report?
I can see it just fine.
Dr. Cannon, I want to draw your attention to lines 122 to 124. Please read silently as I read aloud. If Petrillo had hepatic disease, I cannot explain why that disorder would have been fatal on June 8th. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, oh, I meant June 8th specifically. I mean, I've never contradicted myself.
So it is not correct to say.
Actually, improper impeachment. There's no direct contradiction being elicited here.
Well, let plaintiff's counsel plaintiff's counsel, do you have any response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to screen share again?
Yes, please do.
So I have written down from the direct that Dr. Cannon said that Genesis Petrillo could have died from fatal hepatic disease. Her
yes.
Says, if Petrillo had hepatic disease, I cannot explain why that disorder would have been fatal.
Right. So there's several factors that could cause a final fatal.
Hold on, Dr. Cannon. We're dealing with a sidebar with the attorneys. So defense counsel responds to that.
Just because you don't know why it happened on that day doesn't mean it couldn't have happened.
I understand. Couple things. One, improper impeachment objection is hearsay. So just point of reference for that. That's a technical term for it, but I understand what you said. I'm going to overrule the objection and let you redirect on this point. I understand kind of the gray area here that might exist, so I'm going to let the attorneys fight it out through examination. So, and the witness obviously gets to have her say as well. So I'm going to overrule.
Dr. Cannon, you also said something else in direct that I want to examine. You said that hepatic disease happens gradually. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a chronic illness, so it builds up over time.
Would you say that hepatic disease can occur at any point?
What do you mean by that?
Would you say that hepatic disease can occur at any point?
Do you mean a certain cause of hepatic disease? Like an attack can certainly happen at any point if you have hepatic disease.
Can hepatic disease develop and occur at any point?
At any point in your life? I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question.
Well, I'm asking that because you say that hepatic disease can occur at any point, and that's in direct contradiction with your statement that hepatic disease happens gradually over time.
I'm afraid I don't understand the contradiction there.
Is it your testimony that hepatic disease can occur at any point?
At any point in someone's life, certainly they can start developing hepatic disease, and then it builds up over time after that point.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. You also reviewed all of Genesis Petrillo's medical records. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you reviewed those records that showed no record of Mr. Petrillo having hepatic disease. Is that correct?
Right, there wasn't a record because there couldn't be a record. If you don't have a blood test for hepatic disease, it can't be on your record. And Genesis didn't have those blood tests.
In fact, Dr. Cannon, you believe that hepatic disease is the least likely of the possible causes of death for Genesis Petrillo.
Yes, I did conclude it was the least likely based on the information that I had, but it is one of the most promising because it matches exactly with Genesis Petrillo's symptoms, and I can't confirm it because of those missing blood tests, but I can tell you that it is still a potential cause. If I knew more, I'd be able to rule it out completely or give it to you as
Dr. Cannon, yes or no, you concluded that hepatic disease is the least likely of the possible causes of death for Genesis Petrillo.
Yes, with my current information, I agree.
In fact, you say you believe that this is because Genesis Petrillo displayed neither of the symptoms for advanced hepatic disease, the one that's fatal.
If you're referring to jaundice, that's a common symptom. It's not in every case.
Yes, but Genesis Petrillo did not display jaundice.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there. There wasn't reference to it one way or the other in the report.
So Dr. Cannon, from the materials that you reviewed, you did not notice that Genesis Petrillo had jaundice.
No, Dr. Kwan didn't note any, but from my own experience in hospitals, I know that once you get to the more dramatic symptoms in the closer to the time of death, such as the bronchospasms, it's easy to overlook a yellowing of the eyes. So I don't know if there was jaundice or not.
In fact, you say that hepatic disease would not even explain Mr. Petrillo's fatality.
Well, it would cause respiratory failure if the liver shut down, potentially.
Well, Dr. Cannon, you believe that even if hepatic disease, the least likely cause of death, were to occur, that pesticide poisoning would have to be a partial cause of death. Isn't that correct?
I did say that to the extent that the organophosphates contributed to that attack, that would be true, but they don't necessarily have to contribute. We don't know what the dosage was in Genesis Petrillo's symptoms of that organophosphate pesticides. It could have been so small that it absolutely had no effect on the hepatic disease attack.
In fact, you believe that the facts are consistent with Petrillo's death being caused by consuming wine that contained pesticides.
I did conclude that that was the most likely, but I can't rule out the other options as a woman of science, so I can't tell you more than that.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Okay. Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Okay. Everyone should stop saying briefly. It doesn't matter. If it's going to be long or short, I don't care. Just do it. So anyway, with that admonition, please proceed.
Dr. Cannon, can you explain why you listed hepatic disease as the least likely cause of death based on the evidence you were able to review?
Well, I wasn't able to review the blood tests, so I wasn't able to kind of confirm a possible diagnosis of hepatic disease.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Any recross based on that?
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay. Dr. Cannon, you can be excused. Defense counsel, call your third witness.
Can we get a few seconds here to put down scores?
Not for you.
Are the judges ready?
I don't know, Andrew, are we?
All right, we're ready.
Okay. At this time, the defense would like to call Ms. Blair Osborne to the stand.
Okay.
Hi, Ms. Osborne. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi.
Sorry, I didn't see you earlier, so I just didn't mean to interrupt you, counsel. But you understand you're under oath?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Please proceed. My apologies, defense counsel.
You're fine. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, my name is Blair Osborne.
And what do you do for a living, Ms. Osborne?
Well, I like to think of it as I make dreams come true, but my professional title is a event planner.
Why did you decide to become an event planner?
Well, I've been planning events ever since I was a little girl, and I would always be put in charge of the decorations at Osborne family reunions. And that's why in 2011, I decided to start my own event planning company, Bliss by Blair Estates. I've been running it ever since.
What kind of events do you plan?
Oh, all kinds of things. Corporate retreats, ceremonies. But my favorite are the weddings I plan. Weddings are usually such happy occasions.
Ms. Osborne, are you familiar with Harper Martini?
Yeah, I am. Harper owns Peony Estates Winery, which is where I've held a lot of events over the years.
Why do you host so many events there?
Well, it's just a gorgeous venue, and the staff has always been so attentive and ready to solve any problems that come up before me or my clients' guests even know that there's a problem. It's a great venue to work with.
Did you ever plan a personal event of Harper Martini?
Yeah, Harper asked me to plan his daughter Casey's wedding to Genesis Petrillo, and I agreed. I was honored. Of course, that was before I knew that the planning wouldn't be that great of an experience.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there were some issues with the process, but really Harper just asked me to plan the wedding, and so I agreed.
Now, what did you think of Genesis Petrillo?
Well, you learn a lot about
relevance.
Relevance of this defense counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. It is the defense's contention in today's trial that Genesis Petrillo died of liver failure, and in today's testimony, Blair Osborne will show that Genesis Petrillo had a habit of alcohol consumption.
Okay, so I think the question of what you think, I don't really care what anybody thinks. She can just talk about what she saw and what she knows. Just limit it to that, she'll be good to go. But specific to the phrasing of the question, I'm going to strike that, but just re-ask it in a different way, you'll be good to go. So sustain, strike, you're good.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Osborne, what was your perception of Mr. Petrillo?
Well, I liked Mr. Petrillo, of course. I like all my clients, but I could tell that he had a tendency to drink too much at a couple of wedding-related events.
Do any wedding-related events come to mind?
Yeah, there were two. The first was a little pre-wedding fling at the Black Bear Casino, and the second was, of course, the wedding rehearsal dinner.
So let's move to the first event you talked about, the Black Bear Casino. What happened there?
Well, I wasn't there because that place is really not on the brand of Bliss by Blair Estates, but I overheard a voicemail that made it clear to me that Genesis had gotten really drunk at that party.
Objection, hearsay.
Counsel, what's the proffer of the statement? What's your response?
Sorry?
Can you make a proffer of the statement and your response to that as well?
Yes, Your Honor. Currently, so first of all, it's not a hearsay. It's under exception of party opponent because we're talking about Harper Martini. That's the first argument. And second, it's going to be an effect on the listener. So even if you don't buy that, it's not for the truth matter, or it's an exception because it's a party opponent. It's also going to be used for the effect on the listener.
So what's the statement going to be?
The statement is going to be, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it'll kill Genesis.
Okay, counsel, plaintiff's counsel response.
Your Honor, defense asked, Miss Osborne said that there was a voicemail, but the voicemail they're talking about is from Genesis, who is not the party opponent.
Okay, so there's dispute over who left it, Genesis or Harper. I mean, so is it defense counsel, is it Genesis or Harper? Am I mistaken on this? Who is it?
Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, I misconstrued the earlier objection. So the response is that it is Genesis's voicemail. However, the effect on the listener is on Harper Martini, and it's Blair Osborne's perception of Harper's reaction to the voicemail.
Okay, and the statement within the voicemail was what was that? So I think the
statement was, one of these days Genesis will drink, the voicemail is not relevant in the case. We're not using the voicemail's contents for the truth of the matter. We're using Harper's reaction to the voicemail and the statements that Harper makes post voicemail.
Okay, so let me listen to the answer because I feel like there's a lot here. Just give the answer, counsel. Let's revisit this in a second. I want to get the answer from the witness. So.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Osborne, what happened after Mr. Martini played the voicemail from Mr. Petrillo?
Right, so I couldn't understand a lot of what was said in the voicemail. It was just clear that Mr. Petrillo sounded pretty drunk. But after the message ended, Mr. Martini just said, I swear one of these days Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it'll kill him.
Objection, speculation.
Okay. Defense counsel responds to that.
What exactly is the speculation? I'm sorry, I'm a little unclear.
Plaintiff.
That Mr. Petrillo sounded drunk on the voicemail.
Okay, so I'm going to just jump to the end here. Witness needs to lay out exactly the emphasis and intonation and vocal intonation that would show that this person's drunk. Just add on that it seemed to me that he was drunk, but I need foundation for that before I'm going to let it in. And then also I need to hear corroboration that she's confident that this is Petrillo's voice, because I'm feeling like there's some uncertainty around that. And then on top of that as well, the statements that Martini makes are a little suspect to me because it just doesn't seem like it's going for the effect on the listener. It seems like it's going for the fact remembered. That's my impression. So I'm going to go ahead and sustain and strike that statement, but I'm also going to need more foundation for the assertion that Petrillo was drunk on the voicemail. So I need that. So give me that.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Osborne, if you weren't at the Black Bear Casino, how exactly do you know that Genesis Petrillo was drunk?
Right. Genesis, just in the voicemail, I recognized it as Genesis's voice, and it just sounded, I'm a wedding planner, I hear a lot of drunk people, but I just heard that his voice just sounded shaky, kind of slurred. I mean, just your stereotypical things that you expect from hearing a drunk person.
Right. And now, Ms. Osborne, you mentioned that Genesis was also drunk at the wedding rehearsal. Do you know how much he had to drink that night?
I wasn't counting his drinks or anything, so no. I did see him drink from the bottle of wine that Harper gave him, and then pour another real big glass after taking his first drink from there. But I didn't see him give that glass to anyone else.
And Ms. Osborne, did you speak with Mr. Petrillo at any point that night?
Yeah, so it was late. Most of the guests were starting to filter out, go to bed, but I ran into Mr. Petrillo with another member of the wedding party, Angel Rodriguez, who were set up at the cocktail stand, and they both appeared like they needed to drink some water.
Now, Ms. Osborne, did you speak with Mr. Martini at any point?
Not that night, no. I went home because there was nothing left for me to do that night. I came early in the morning the next day to make some final preparations for the wedding and make sure all of my safety and cleanliness standards were in place. But when I talked to Harper, Harper just said that he was really excited for the wedding. He wanted it to be perfect.
On what grounds?
Hearsay to the statements of Harper Martini.
Okay, that I'm very excited about. What was the last part? That's the part you're objecting to be clear?
Yes, Harper Martini is not their party opponent, therefore it's hearsay.
Okay, counsel, is there another exception that this would meet?
Yes, Your Honor. This is going to show Mr. Martini's state of mind at that day, because we're trying to show that Harper Martini was ready for the day at hand, namely his daughter's wedding.
Is there a portion of the statement beyond something about very excited? Was there anything past that? Or is there going to be?
I do not believe so, no.
Okay, then I'm going to overrule the objection. I think it's a present state of mind and emotional state, so please proceed.
So, Ms. Osborne, what did you do after you spoke with Mr. Martini?
Well, we went to start waking up the wedding guests, and everyone started coming out pretty fast, except when we got to Genesis's door, and it turned out that he wasn't there. Mr. Martini and I both had no idea where he was, but we found out later that he'd gone to the hospital and was in a coma.
And Ms. Osborne, when did you find out about Petrillo's death?
Not until they came back that afternoon.
Ms. Osborne, do you have any reason to believe that Peony Estates that there was any likelihood that Peony Estates was to blame for Mr. Petrillo's death?
Well, I never observed anything more than like the highest safety standards and cleanliness at Peony Estates. I mean, I'm very picky about the venues I work with, and Peony Estates always met all of my standards, so I don't see what could have gone wrong.
I'm sorry, that's time. No further questions.
Cross-examination. I sometimes forgot to unmute myself. Please proceed, counselor.
Now, Miss Osborne, you saw Genesis Petrillo before you left the rehearsal dinner, correct?
Yeah, I did. Like I said, he was over at the cocktail stand and appeared to be pretty drunk.
But you didn't know how much he had to drink, correct?
No, like I said earlier, I wasn't counting his drinks. I was a bit preoccupied.
But you weren't worried about him before you left. Is that correct?
Yeah, I thought that he would be hungover but manageable. I guess I was wrong.
And you no longer hold events at Peony Estates. Is that correct?
No, I don't personally have any concerns with the work of Peony Estates, but with publicity, it's better to move somewhere else.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, no time for redirects. This witness may be excused. We are running okay on time. I can give you like 2 minutes. I don't know how much time is left for statements. If it's really necessary, I can give you 2 minutes. Does anyone want that? No, we can proceed right to it. It's up to you.
Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
All right, defense.
The defense is also ready to proceed.
Let's do this. Closing arguments.
I'm sorry, can you give timekeeper 1 moment, please?
Oh, yeah. Can both timekeepers just inform their sides respectively of how much time they have for their statements? I understand it's like a joint 12 and you parse it out however, so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yes, Your Honor.
So whenever you get the chance, just tell me how long the plaintiff's got and how long the defense has got.
Plaintiff has 7 minutes and 47 seconds, and I'm ready to proceed.
What's defense have?
I have defense as having 7 minutes and 3 seconds. I don't know what they have for their.
That's exactly what defense has. We have 7:45 for plaintiff and 7:03 for ourselves.
I love synchronicity. Please proceed.
I just kept thinking about Peony Estates. That is what Casey Soto was thinking when she found the love of her life had died the night before their wedding. Genesis Petrillo should still be here today. And if the defendant had done what was required of them, he still would be. But that's not what happened. Peony Estates prioritized their profits over the basic safety of their own employees and their guests. All they had to do was follow basic standard protocols about pesticides, but they didn't. And the sad thing is, the defendant knew how to keep everyone safe, and they chose not to. Peony Estates made the active choice to disregard basic safety and scrambled when they started to suffer the consequences. Casey Soto told you about all of the issues Peony Estates had: a drainage problem, a storage problem, and that there weren't even signs reminding employees to wash their hands. You heard how Peony Estates neglected the advice of the senior Midlands health inspector time and time again. All they had to do was follow basic protocol, and Genesis Petrillo would still be here today. And they couldn't even do that. That is why we have brought forth a claim of negligence per se against Peony Estates today. We had the burden of proof in today's case. We had to prove negligence per se by a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not. Members of the jury, we not only met that burden, we exceeded it. To prove negligence per se, we had to prove 4 elements here today. First, that the statute in question, Midland Section 12100, was a safety statute. The defense already admitted to that prior to trial today. Second, we had to prove that Genesis Petrillo was a part of the statute's protected class. The defense already agreed to that before trial today. The only 2 elements we had to prove to you were 1, that Peony Estates violated the health statute by failing to properly restrict and store pesticides, and 2, that Peony Estates' failure to do so resulted in Genesis Petrillo's death. Let's go through those 2 elements one by one. How did Peony Estates violate the Midland statute? You heard Inspector Adkins O'Keefe testify that she inspected Peony Estates 3 times from 2018 through 2019, right up to Genesis and Casey's rehearsal dinner. In 2018, she told you that Peony Estates was filled with bugs and that they had been there for over 8 weeks. Peony Estates told her that they would use pesticides and solve the problem. When Inspector Adkins O'Keefe came back, Peony Estates had 4 health code violations in the bottling area, and 3 of them were related to pesticides. 1 month before the rehearsal dinner. One of those violations, that some wine was too close to some pesticides. The 2019 Cara wine that killed Genesis Petrillo. Inspector Adkins O'Keefe told Peony Estates to discard this wine immediately because it was just too dangerous. You may be asking yourself, why would the defendant do this? Why not implement these changes? You heard Casey Soto testify that her and Genesis were so concerned about pesticides that they thought about moving their wedding to somewhere else. But Harper Martini told Casey that it was good publicity for business. And because of this, you know that they violated the statute. That element is proven. So what came of Peony Estates knowingly ignoring the rules for sake of profit? Genesis Petrillo was poisoned by the wine that Peony Estates provided and died. Dr. Kwan told you that there was nothing else found in Genesis Petrillo besides wine and pesticides. All of the symptoms and all of the tests that Dr. Kwan ran made it crystal clear that Genesis Petrillo was poisoned by wine contaminated with pesticides. The same wine that Inspector Adkins O'Keefe had told them needed to be discarded because it was just too dangerous. Genesis Petrillo was a young man who was excited to marry his girlfriend of 3 years, filled with the excitement for the joy of life, about to come opening a wine bottle. And that wine bottle would be the very thing that took that joy of life away. Peony Estates knowingly disregarded basic pesticide protocols in order to make a profit, and Genesis Petrillo paid the ultimate price. Don't let Peony Estates get away with something so careless and despicable. Find the defendant liable for negligence. Thank you.
We'll turn it over to defense.
Yes, Your Honor. As we saw throughout today's case, there is a simple explanation for Genesis Petrillo's death. Petrillo died from liver failure, not pesticide poisoning. Earlier, the plaintiff walked into this room with a negligence per se claim and the sole burden of proof in this case, meaning they had to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning as a result of Peony Estates mishandling their pesticides. Now today, the plaintiff failed to meet that burden because they lack any reliable or convincing evidence. The plaintiff hoped that you would infer that Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning, but in order to make that inference, they wanted you to jump through hoop after hoop about when pesticide could have gotten into the wine, how much pesticide could have gotten into the wine, and if pesticide was really the cause of Petrillo's death. Members of the jury, the fact that you would even need to reach to get to that point shows that the plaintiff failed to meet their burden. Now, at the beginning of the trial, the plaintiff made a big deal about Peony Estates choosing profits over people. Now, you could attach that cliche to any company, but it would be nothing without proof. Today, the plaintiff prioritized playing pretend over providing proof. Now, at the beginning of today's trial, my co-counsel, Shanna Kim, asked that you keep 3 questions in mind in today's case,
And as we walk through these three questions together, we'll see how the plaintiff lacks the proof needed to meet their burden. There's one simple explanation. Genesis Petrillo died of liver failure, not pesticide poisoning. The first question we asked ourselves was whether it's even possible the wine that Petrillo drank was contaminated with pesticides. None of the witnesses today told you how or when the wine could have gotten contaminated. Austin Lewis, however, the chief winemaker who personally oversaw the production of Cara wine, did tell you that at no stage during the three-step winemaking process did pesticide ever even get close enough to contaminate any wine. The plaintiff wants to pretend that the wine bottle they tested for pesticide is somehow proof that the wine Petrillo drank was contaminated. Members of the jury, let me remind you that the bottle they tested positive for pesticide was found in a dumpster. With this so-called proof, the plaintiff proves absolutely nothing other than the fact that, yes, things get dirty after rolling around in a dumpster. Remember, there is a simple explanation. Genesis Petrillo died from liver failure, not pesticide poisoning. The second question we thought of was, could pesticide poisoning really have caused Petrillo's death? Now, today, the plaintiff failed to prove that the wine Genesis drank was contaminated. The wine was never tested. Their expert witness, Adkins O'Keefe, made a big deal about how dangerous it was and how this was a health code violation, but they failed to give you any proof that that wine was contaminated as a result. Instead, they're gonna play pretend about how that's evidence. The bottle test was unreliable. They didn't test the actual wine. And on top of that, Austin Lewis informs you about an occasion where an employee, Kirby Doolittle, accidentally ingested some pesticide. But this employee's experience was completely different from Genesis Petrillo's experience. That employee immediately got sick after a couple of sips and almost died. Genesis Petrillo was drinking the Cara wine throughout the night. The last question we considered was, what else could have caused Petrillo's death? Today, we called Dr. Cannon to the stand. And Dr. Cannon told you about a liver condition called hepatic disease. Dr. Cannon also told you how all of the symptoms Petrillo experienced were consistent with hepatic disease. Today, on the stand, I made Dr. Kwan admit that all of Petrillo's symptoms were consistent with hepatic disease. From Blair Osborne, you heard that Genesis Petrillo had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. This is also consistent with hepatic disease. Members of the jury, as plaintiff gets back up here and tries to play pretend about what's actually evidence or not, when they hold up the bottle test, I want you to look inside and understand that the bottle is empty. The bottle was found in the trash with pesticide. There's no proof in the bottle. At the end of today's trial, I ask that you use your common sense. Use what was actually evidence in today's case and find Peony Estates not liable.
Okay, we'll turn it over for rebuttal if there's time left.
A simple explanation. The defense is claiming that hepatic disease is what killed Genesis Petrillo today. But they had to jump through hoops to get you to believe that. You heard Dr. Kwan say that she didn't look or notice anything wrong with Genesis Petrillo's liver symptoms and that she tested for pesticide poisoning because she saw landmark symptoms of pesticide poisoning in Genesis Petrillo. Playing pretend You saw Dr. Cannon get up before you and tell you that she believed that pesticide poisoning was not the most likely explanation and that hepatic disease could have happened, and tried to deny that she said that it was the least likely cause of death. Dr. Cannon also told you today that hepatic disease could not have resulted in Genesis Petrillo's death without having pesticide poisoning. Let's talk about the 3 questions the defense asked you to focus on today. Is it possible that the wine drank was contaminated with pesticides? Yes. You heard from Casey Soto and from Inspector Adkins O'Keefe that Genesis Petrillo could have died from pesticide poisoning because of all the violations of Peony Estates. What could have caused Genesis Petrillo's death? Nothing else besides pesticides. Find the defendant liable.
Okay, so that concludes the trial. We made it just under the buzzer for all loss. So I am going to turn it over to comments to my co-judges who have been putting up with me this entire time. So take it away, whoever wants to start.
Before we do that, can everyone, especially witnesses, get on camera so I can identify you for when we rank? It's hard for me to know who's who just based off the ballot saying witness number X or whatever. Thanks.
Plaintiff opener, which witness did you direct? Yes.
I directed Riley Adkins O'Keefe.
Riley Adkins O'Keefe, that was your second witness, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
I'm ready if the other judges are.
Yeah, I'm good. Go ahead.
All right, so I guess we can start by introducing ourselves. I'm Andrew Pollard. I'm a 2L on trial bar and on the AAJ National Trial Team. Brian, Ed, you guys want to?
Okay, so I am not in law school. I'm a former competitor for Miami Mock Trial for 4 years, and then instead of selling my soul and going to law school, I decided to sell my soul and go into finance. So just a different way of doing it, but all the same. So, Ed, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes. First of all, you can breathe, you're done. You're better than real attorneys, and I'm so impressed that everyone was off of notes. I am Ed Solaski. I am in grad school, not in law school. And 4-year alum of College Mock Trial as both a witness and an attorney.
Which of you wants to start with comments? Because I'll go last.
Doesn't matter to me.
Andrew, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I just want to say again, like everyone did a great job. I know there's a ton of trial bar members who would love to have the experience and skill that you guys clearly already have. And the work shows, the prep work shows on both sides. We can tell how hard you guys have worked on this. So we appreciate it. I also want to say a quick shout out to Ryan. That was a really great presiding judge job. He let you guys argue almost as much as you guys wanted on objection battles, and did a good job explaining for the record. If I was an appellate judge, I'd be like, yes, the judge really told me exactly what they were thinking in every step. So that was great. Most of what I'm going to talk about is like either really small style stuff or really, really small nitpicks. Specific comments are in the comment sheet. So, if there's a specific thing that a witness did or anything, or a specific thing an attorney did that's not useful for general comments, then that's there, that's not here. So yeah, when a judge is really small, I think it only happened a couple of times. When a judge asks you to do something, you don't have to ask permission to do it. And I would say both sides should consider reordering your witnesses to tell the story a little more clearly. I had so there in both sides, and I'm going to say both sides a whole bunch in comments here, but both sides I felt could have reordered it to really tell me the story in a more direct way. Openings, you really need to start with the story and frame the facts in a way that's most favorable to your client. That's the entire point of opening. Not arguing, which you guys actually did really well, avoiding argument. And then just framing the facts. And there's not much else really to do in opening. And this was a huge pet peeve of mine listening to that. If you're not the Mr. Petrillo's wife, or someone who knew him personally that would have called him Genesis, just say Mr. Petrillo. Hearing Genesis Petrillo over and over again throughout the entire trial made me want to lose my mind, especially from attorneys. So just say Mr. Petrillo. If you're the wife, say Genesis, or if you knew him personally, say Genesis. On directs, attorneys across the board did a great job of being invisible, or as invisible as possible, letting the witnesses be the ones to speak the information. Thought witnesses across the board did a good job on directs, really had no complaints there. Crosses, don't cut the witnesses off mid-sentences. That's really kind of a no-no. And then when you say no further questions, just say finish it off with at this time. It's a really small, nitpicky pet peeve thing, but just say at this time whenever you're finishing that statement. I think there was a lot of problems with laying foundation with really simple questions on cross. There were a lot of compound questions, especially towards the end of a lot of the crosses. I understand why there are, and it's really tough to do, but anytime I'm hearing an and, but, yet, for, so, that's like an immediate objection to compound question. So just be aware of that. Don't thank witnesses when they finally give you the answer you want. I know it's like, oh, thank you. Finally, I can move on. But just don't thank them. Just move on. Everyone signposted really well, so I appreciated that. It helped me follow crosses. And witnesses, if you're impeached, do your best to clean up the answer, but just let the attorney redirect it and clean it up there. You don't want to draw additional attention to the impeachment than's already been drawn to it. On objections, wait for the judge and then just say, may I be heard, or may I respond? I think many of you guys did that. There's some times where there's a little bit of like crosstalk. I know it's also difficult because of Zoom. If someone just objects to hearsay and you have no idea what it is, just say, Your Honor, could opposing counsel please clarify their objection, and that solves the problem. You don't say like, I don't understand or anything like that. Just ask for clarification. And then on objection battles, if you know the game is up, you've lost the objection, just concede gracefully by requesting a limiting instruction. There's a lot of times where it's available. Just, okay, yeah, let's just concede and ask for a limitation on that. Closings really good. I didn't have a lot of things. There's a lot of flipping of the theme. I enjoyed that, but both sides did it. Neither of you explained the burden through an analogy, though, which is something I'm looking for, and I know a lot of judges are looking for. Give me some kind of analogy. Maybe it's a recipe like baking a cake and you need all the ingredients, and if you're missing an ingredient, you don't have it. Something like that. For this burden, a lot of people do like a weight of a feather or scales of justice. I mean, think of maybe something a little bit more creative than that, but either way, just try to find a way to explain the burden in a way that means more likely than not, because juries think, and when you do voir dire practice, you'll learn about this. Juries think like, well, if I'm not 70% sure, there's no way I could say that person owes them $10 million, right? I couldn't give that kind of a judgment without being more likely than not. Really, 51% is all I need. So jurors really don't buy that. and there's obviously a reason why. So you guys on both sides want to try to clarify a little better. That's all I have.
Have at it, Ed.
All right. So first off the bat, I want to reiterate what Andrew said. I was really impressed, especially for a first tournament of the year, I'm presuming, first time on Zoom. I mean, you guys pulled this off without a hitch, really. As far as the openings, closings, signposting for attorneys, I agree really with Andrew. The themes I would have liked to have come out a little more on opening. It did take me a second, and that might just have been because I missed it at points, but it took me a second for each team to figure out what that theme was. For the directs and crosses, I'm going to focus a little more on witnesses because witnesses never get enough love in this activity. We have a couple of other judges here who are fantastic with attorneys, so I'm sure if, you guys want to make more comments to that, go ahead. Starting with the plaintiff, open with the expert, which is an interesting choice. I thought the testimony worked pretty well. You were credible. My big note for your testimony was I would have liked to see like a little more, like pep or energy, or especially there's like a lot of anatomy, scientific terminology in there. I think those present really nice opportunities for being like, oh yeah, let me tell you about this really cool thing that I do, and B, taking that, putting it in layman's terms. I thought a demonstrative, I don't know exactly how demonstratives are working this year, but however you guys can do that, I think that would really help with your testimony. Witness number 2, the health inspector, came out of the gates firing with the attitude, with the enthusiasm. Loved that. The Zoom joke at the beginning made me smile just a little. The special instruction or stipulation or whatever it was, great catch by the attorney. Again, especially early in the year, you're going to run into teams who just aren't ready for that. For the witness, I'm sorry, I can't see your actual names here, but for the witness, it seemed to me like you lost a touch of that character enthusiasm after that little back and forth with the attorneys, which understandable, but if you can just push through that, keep going, act like it didn't even happen, that's one of those things that for the judges really minimizes the importance of whatever just went on with the attorneys. Let me see here, I've got so many pages of notes in front of me. Yeah, and also, the story. You told a really good story like throughout your testimony. I was following along nicely. I thought that went really well for you. Moving on, number 3, our widow. Again, from the beginning, I thought this could have used like a little more energy from both sides, from the attorney and from the witness. You did a nice job kind of as you got going with giving your attorney really great ends of answers. So ends that like fed right into the next question. That's one of those like mock trial tricks that took me a while to like practice, get to that point, but it's noticeable to judges when it happens. The end of your directs, the getting emotional, the crying. I wrote here, crying was at like 60%. It's got to be either like 100 or like 20. Like you're sad, but you're not really going for that teary widowed vibe. So, I mean, I know that's tough. I played defendants. I could never get that crying. I never even really tried to go for it. But if that's the route you choose to go down, full send. Also, on your cross-examination, kind of piggybacking off of that, you went from end of direct, crying, emotional, to one of the first questions asked about Harper, and you smiled a little bit and were kind of reminiscing. That was a real abrupt shift that I noticed. There were points later in that cross where I thought you had an opportunity to like go on the offensive a little bit to really kind of fight back on your attorney, which is a dangerous line because, you know, you'll get judges all the time saying, oh, you were too fighty. But I thought you could have been a little more aggressive there. I feel like I'm giving you a ton of negative stuff. You know, like I said, your answers, the content I loved, and, you know, the overall sad vibe, very good. I would just work on, you know, leveling that to perfection over the course of the rest of the year. Moving on real quick, I know I'm taking a minute here to the defense witnesses. What do we have? Number one. Okay, this was the expert, not expert. Both of you guys, I mean, work on that. That's just kind of, I think, a beginning of the year thing. You'll get that as you go along. Is this an expert? Is this not? That's going to shape your question lines. On cross, there were a couple points you really hammered home this, like, there was no danger. There was no danger. I liked it at first. It got a little much towards the end. You know, and a couple of other things. Oh, we're next to the swamp. This process of like opening the pesticide, spraying it, good the first couple of times. If you start saying it over and over and over, that's just drawing my attention more to it. It's like, oh, is there something here under the surface? Is he trying to cover for something? Be careful with that. The attorney for that, great objections and objection battles, actually really on both sides. Let's see, number two, this was the expert. Yeah, I loved your hand signals a couple times. You were like, oh, there were 3 things, there were 4 things, and you like counted down. That type of stuff is great. The as I've been hinting at stuff, I would let that go. Not as helpful. A few of the impeachments here, you did a really, really nice job handling with the like, I'm not familiar with X, and just kind of holding to that line. That's good stuff. Let your attorneys do some of the work on that, like beyond I'm not familiar with. If you think it's a BS impeachment, let your attorney bring that out. I know it's tough. I know you want to argue, but that's what your attorney is there to do. And then for our wedding planner, yeah, character, energy, great, especially as the last witness at the end of trial. That stuff is super helpful. And short cross, you know, I thought you held up well there.
Ed,
And, yeah.
they're asking that you actually just submit the ballot. I don't know if you just hit the yes button yet.
Oh, yes, we'll go do that.
I love how they put you on blast to everybody.
I know Elliot just jumped in here, so I was like, make sure Elliot gets what he needs. Well, always, you know, I'll make one quick comment about witnesses. There was only one time where I nearly had a heart attack, and I think that was with Austin. If I was your attorney, I would have had a literal heart attack when you talked about the Whole Foods comment. I don't know if that was like off the cuff or something, but like I would have had like a freak out face, like cold sweat when you said that. If that was off the cuff, don't do it next round, please.
Ed, keep going. Your comments, both of you guys are just like nailing everything ever.
Ed's rocking it on the witnesses. Yeah.
I gotta figure out this battle. You guys.
Oh, okay. I'll jump in for a little bit, but Ed's comments are pretty much invaluable. I think that's a really good resource, and I agree with a lot of what Andrew said. I mean, everything that Andrew said as well. And let me start off with a few things. For one, like it's early in the year, right? Like in terms of kind of how I presided over this round. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's a tough time. I wanted you guys to have a little bit of fun. You know, if we were at regionals, orgs, and nationals, I would have handled this a lot differently. But I just kind of wanted you guys to get engaged, which is why I let you guys go back and forth on objections and kind of try to keep things, you know, even keeled for everybody. So that's how, you know, I came into this whole thing. In terms of overall where you're at, I see a lot of early season mistakes and things that need to be done differently, right? Like having, you know, competed for 4 years, early season mistakes are like things aren't simplified and hammered home. And sometimes there's just, you know, you overlook a certain thing or so on and so forth. And I think just in terms of specifics, right? Like I thought there needed to be a common narrative for each side that I didn't quite get the whole way through. And if you're like a historian of mock trial like I was, a great round to watch that illustrates a lot of how this case can go is the 2011 national championship between UCLA and NYU, because they dealt with something pretty much identical where a kid was poisoned
Granted, this wasn't by his own choice, but there was a lot of medical examinations that were going on. That was the crux of the case. I think, and it's mock trial at the highest level. So if you can ever find that, do it. I think that that's a really valuable lesson. So with that in mind, I think generally speaking, the theme for the defense I thought needed to be more substantive. I wanted to hear something more about just overall their medical theory, which I think was the heart of the case and the simplest explanation. Because one, simplest explanation, that's subjective, right? Like to me, listening to the first three witnesses on the plaintiff's side, of course, I'm like, that makes the most sense because that's the most testimony I've heard to that point. So then you need more context as we go on. So I really wanted you to have something that you could push the whole way through. And to the plaintiff's theme, something that I missed this whole way and that I think is the motivational component, like the icing on the cake, so to speak, is the profits bit. Because I know I heard a little bit about like, oh, well, it was skimping on, safety protocols and that made it easy for them. But I needed like a pocket of a witness and then another severe bolster of that on cross-examination, where it was just like, these people are driven solely by money and are like the worst people ever. And I just needed that hit over the head to really have the idea that they're terrible people sort of sold on me. Because there's a lot of implications of like, they're reckless, obviously, they didn't care about X, Y, and Z. I needed that more for me, generally speaking. Ed, are you good? So I'm going to turn it back over to you if you are. Okay, I'll forgo for a second and give it back to Ed.
Yeah. So I wasn't really listening to what Ryan was saying, but yeah, I think there were a few other like individual notes that I had. So obviously, you guys can look at the comments or I'll stick around afterwards. Attorneys and signposting on like direct versus cross. You want to be more heavy on the signposting on direct than you want to be on cross. I thought sometimes that was flipped a little bit. And yeah, openings, I mean, that's like one of the toughest jobs you can have. But yeah, I really think that story point, I think Andrew mentioned that at the very beginning of comments, but that would be the big thing I would work on for both openers. And yeah, I'm done. So great job, y'all.
Yeah, so I'll pick up on this a little bit, and I don't want to keep you guys forever, so I'll stick around, but I'll try to just go through stuff pretty quickly. The 3 question stuff for the defense team, like that's a classic mock trial thing. Like the UVA founded that back like 15 years ago, so I really respect that. I would be a little bit more pointed with the questions and make it so they can't be escaped. I thought that there was some wiggle room at different points, and that just, I think you need to tighten up a little bit. In terms of the first responder, I really enjoyed that for the first part of it, but then when the special instruction thing hit, like you lost your motivation, you lost your steam. And then there was stuff going on, and I want to get to the defense just a little, shift gears a little bit. Foundational bit is something where like that was beaten into me as a competitor, and my coaches were very big sticklers for that. Like you cannot introduce a single fact without clear, convincing foundation for this. And the other quote I heard all the time was, I don't give a damn what you think. And I don't give a damn what you think. I give a damn what you saw, and I care what someone else may have told you and all that stuff. But when you say, I think X, Y, and Z, I just want to object to you myself. So with respect to how we saw that with Austin Lewis and a few other individuals, right? Like that's a circumstance where you need to be like, hey, and I thought Lewis had a great opening to do a lot of things really. And I don't know anything about the case beyond what I've seen today, but just a lot of stuff of like, this is how we handle wine. Like, this is what we do. We've never had complaints about this stuff in the past. And maybe there's some evidence issue with that point, but we've never had complaints in the past. We've never had poison issues, so on and so forth. Like, we followed our protocols and measures, and the health department, all well and good, but, and that matters, don't get me wrong. But, we kind of have our own rules here and we know what we're doing. With respect to the expert canon, I believe, you need to front that bias pocket. Because I was listening to that and my jaw was hitting the floor. It's like, I've never heard anything like this in AMTA. I was like, oh my God, like that needs to come out at some point in direct. It's going to suck. It's going to be a brutal pill to swallow, but you have to do it. Because when I heard that on cross as the first pocket, I was like, damn. And ditto to a point about bias, going over, Ed's trying to silence me. So yeah, if you guys want to go to lunch, speak now and I'll be done. I do want to do that.
Yeah, the only problem is that our next round is scheduled to start in about 45 minutes.
Go.
So, yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Guys,
Guys,
you
go have
so
a
much.
good lunch. Thanks for putting up with us.
Yep.
All right. Good job, boys.
Fun times.
Awesome. Thank you for presiding, Ryan.
No worries. No worries. It's fun.
Yeah, that was good. You let him argue a little bit more than I probably would have. There's some objection battles. I was like,
some of that stuff to me, I thought that they weren't picking up on some of the things I was saying, and that was a little frustrating. The special instruction thing fucked me up.
Yeah.
yeah, that was definitely. I was like, whoa, okay, we got impeachment by special instruction. You don't see those often.
Well, when it happened, I was immediately like, okay, I'm not going to allow this. Like, you can't get special instruction in trial. But then when she got into it, I was like, oh,
You're right. Yeah.
I was like, this is right. I've seen one thing like that ever before, and I was like, this is dead on right. The impeachments of the expert.
Are we still supposed to be streaming? I don't know if we're.
Oh, we could probably cancel that.
Yeah, we should cancel.
Sorry, parents. Your kids did a great job.